The chipped porcelain mug warmed Emily's hands, a meager comfort against the chill that perpetually clung to her small apartment, a chill that seemed to seep from the very marrow of her bones. Outside, the relentless drumming of a late autumn rain mirrored the anxious rhythm in her chest. $900. That was it? A stark, unforgiving number that represented the absolute precipice. Her last sliver of a safety net in a world that felt increasingly determined to strip her bare. The eviction notice, stark white against the peeling paint of her door, had been a brutal punctuation mark on months of mounting anxieties. The bakery where she'd worked, her sanctuary amidst the comforting aroma of yeast and sugar, had shuttered its doors 2 weeks ago, another casualty of the relentless economic downturn that had swept through their small town like a malevolent tide. Now, the meager unemployment checks barely covered groceries, let alone the ever-increasing rent. Lily, her 7-year-old daughter, with eyes the color of melted chocolate and a spirit that stubbornly refused to be dimmed, was sketching at the small kitchen table, her brow furrowed in concentration as she brought a vibrant, imaginary world to life with well-worn crayons. Noah, her 5-year-old son, a whirlwind of boundless energy even in their cramped quarters, was constructing a precarious tower of mismatched blocks, his infectious giggles a bittersweet melody in the otherwise tense atmosphere. Emily watched them, a fierce protectiveness rising within her, a familiar ache in her heart. They were her world, her everything. And she was failing them. The gnawing fear of homelessness, of uprooting their fragile lives yet again, was a constant companion, a shadow that stretched long and dark across her every waking moment. She'd scoured the classifieds, the online listings, every conceivable avenue for affordable housing. But in their current market, affordable was a cruel joke. Landlords demanded exorbitant security deposits and first month's rent, amounts that felt as unattainable as reaching for the moon. Friends had offered temporary couches, but Emily cherished her independence, the small semblance of control she still held over their lives. She couldn't bear the thought of becoming a burden, of disrupting yet another household. Then, she'd seen it. A small, almost dismissive listing in the back pages of the local paper, auction, Wildwood Manor, dilapidated Victorian, as is. The address, on the outskirts of town, was vaguely familiar, a place whispered about in local lore, a grand old house fallen into ruin, shrouded in overgrown landscaping and forgotten memories. Curiosity, a desperate tendril of hope, had led her to the online listing with a few grainy photographs. Wildwood Manor was undeniably a wreck. Broken windows stared out like vacant eyes, the paint peeled in grotesque strips, and the roof sagged in places. It looked like the kind of place where ghosts would feel right at home. The description was equally bleak, detailing structural issues, water damage, and years of neglect. Everyone she'd mentioned it to, her well-meaning but practical sister, Sarah, her concerned neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, had reacted with varying degrees of disbelief and alarm. "Emily, you can't be serious," Sarah had said, her voice laced with worry. "That place is a teardown. You'd be throwing your money away." Mrs. Henderson had crossed herself and muttered something about bad luck and restless spirits. But something about Wildwood Manor had resonated with Emily, a flicker of possibility in the overwhelming darkness. Maybe it was the sheer desperation of her situation that had warped her perspective, or perhaps it was a stubborn refusal to accept defeat. Whatever it was, the idea of owning something, anything, outright, free from the relentless cycle of rent and precarious living, had taken root in her mind. The minimum bid was listed as $500. It was a terrifyingly large sum, almost her entire remaining funds after paying for a few more weeks of bare necessities. But the thought of it, a tangible asset, a place they could truly call their own, no matter how dilapidated, was a siren song she couldn't ignore. The auction was held on a raw, blustery Tuesday morning on the steps of the town hall. A small crowd had gathered, mostly curious onlookers and a few seasoned property developers looking for a bargain on the land. Emily stood at the back, clutching her worn purse, her heart pounding a frantic tattoo against her ribs. The bidding for other properties went quickly, prices soaring beyond her wildest hopes. Then, Wildwood Manor was announced. The auctioneer, a portly man with a booming voice, droned through the list of its many deficiencies. The bidding started at $500. A developer across the way raised his paddle. Then, another. The price climbed steadily, each increment a fresh stab of anxiety for Emily. Just when her hope began to dwindle, the bidding stalled. The developers, perhaps deterred by the extensive repairs needed, seemed to have lost interest. The auctioneer's voice echoed in the sudden silence. $600. Any further bids? He waited, his gaze sweeping across the small crowd. No one moved. Going once, going twice. A surge of adrenaline, a reckless wave of desperation, propelled Emily forward. Her hand trembled as she raised it. 700, she managed, her voice barely a whisper. The auctioneer's eyebrows shot up. The developers exchanged glances. But no one countered. The price hung in the air, a fragile lifeline. The bidding resumed, but the energy had shifted. It was now between Emily and a lone individual she couldn't quite see in the small knot of people near the front. The price crept up in agonizing increments, $750, $800, $850. Each bid felt like a piece of her soul being wagered. Finally, the other bidder dropped out. The auctioneer's hammer fell with a resounding thud. Sold. To the lady in the back, for $900. A wave of dizziness washed over Emily. Relief so profound it was almost painful, mingled with a stark, terrifying realization. She had done it. She had spent every last penny on a crumbling, unwanted house. What in God's name had she just done? The paperwork was a blur of legalese and official stamps. By the end of the week, the keys to Wildwood Manor were in her hand, heavy, cold metal that felt both like a promise and a profound burden. The first time she stepped inside Wildwood Manor, the reality of her impulsive decision hit her with the force of a physical blow. The air was thick with the smell of damp wood, mildew, and decades of undisturbed dust. Sunlight struggled to penetrate the grime-coated windows, casting long, eerie shadows across the cavernous rooms. Plaster was cracked and peeling, revealing the lath beneath like skeletal remains. The floorboards groaned ominously underfoot. Lily and Noah, initially wide-eyed with a sense of adventure, soon grew subdued, their excitement replaced by a quiet apprehension. Even Noah's boundless energy seemed to falter in the face of the overwhelming decay. As Emily began the daunting task of cleaning, of trying to make the uninhabitable even remotely livable, she started to uncover remnants of the house's past. A tarnished silver locket on a dusty vanity. A collection of yellowed sheet music in a cobweb-draped corner. And then, in the dusty recesses of a forgotten pantry, she found a small, locked wooden box. It was heavier than it looked, the wood smooth and worn beneath her fingertips. There was no key. Driven by a curiosity she couldn't explain, Emily managed to pry it open with a butter knife. Inside, nestled amongst dried flowers and faded ribbons, were the journals of Eleanor Vance. The elegant script on the aged pages told a story of a different time, of a grand house filled with laughter and life. But as Emily delved deeper, the tone shifted, becoming more introspective, tinged with a growing sadness and a fierce determination. Eleanor wrote of her research, of her tireless efforts to understand the unique flora of the surrounding wildwood and their potential medicinal properties. She spoke of a rare ailment afflicting the local community, a debilitating condition she called wildwood syndrome, and her desperate race against time to find a cure. Interspersed with her scientific observations were personal reflections, poignant memories of a daughter lost too soon to the very illness Eleanor was fighting to understand. The grief was palpable, raw on the brittle pages. Then, a new name began to appear in the later entries. R.P. Eleanor's elegant script would become hurried, almost frantic, whenever she mentioned him. There was a growing sense of paranoia, of being watched, of her work being threatened. The final entries were fragmented, filled with fear and a desperate plea to protect her research, a secret worth more than its weight in gold. As Emily read those last, chilling words, a shiver traced its way down her spine. This old house, this unwanted burden she had acquired for a pittance, held more than just dust and decay within its crumbling walls. It held a secret that Eleanor Vance had deemed worth protecting with her life. And somehow, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that that secret was still very much alive within the whispering walls of Wildwood Manor. The following days blurred into a relentless cycle of cleaning, scrubbing, and hauling debris. The sheer volume of accumulated neglect in Wildwood Manor was staggering. Mountains of dust motes danced in the faint beams of sunlight that managed to pierce the grime-coated windows. Cobwebs, thick as cotton candy and just as stubbornly clinging, draped every corner, every piece of decaying furniture. The air hung heavy with the musty scent of decay and forgotten things. Lily, initially hesitant, soon found a strange sort of fascination in the process, her small hands diligently wiping down dusty surfaces, her imagination conjuring stories about the people who had once lived within these walls. Noah, ever the explorer, treated the crumbling mansion like an enormous, albeit slightly spooky, playground, his shouts echoing through the empty rooms as he discovered forgotten trinkets and oddities. Emily, fueled by a potent cocktail of desperation and a burgeoning sense of purpose, tackled the larger tasks. She wrestled with warped floorboards, chipped away at peeling plaster, and cleared mountains of fallen leaves and debris from the overgrown yard. Each small act of reclamation felt like a tiny victory, a defiant stand against the overwhelming decay. In the evenings, after the children were asleep, Emily would lose herself in Eleanor Vance's journals. By the flickering light of a battery-powered lantern, she pieced together the fragments of Eleanor's life, her passion for botany, her unwavering dedication to her research. Eleanor's detailed descriptions of the local flora, her meticulous notes on their properties, and her increasingly desperate entries about Wildwood syndrome painted a vivid picture of a brilliant mind consumed by a singular purpose. The more Emily read, the more questions arose. What exactly was Wildwood syndrome? Eleanor's descriptions were vague, hinting at a debilitating illness that affected both the body and the mind, seemingly unique to their small community. And who was R.P.? The fear in Eleanor's later entries was palpable, a chilling premonition of danger. One particularly rainy afternoon, while exploring the dusty library, a room lined with decaying bookshelves that had somehow escaped the worst of the neglect, Emily stumbled upon a loose floorboard. Beneath it, wrapped in a faded velvet cloth, was a small, leather-bound book, Eleanor's personal diary, separate from her research journals. This diary offered a more intimate glimpse into Eleanor's life. Her joys, her sorrows, her hopes for her daughter, Sarah. The entries about Sarah were particularly heart-wrenching, detailing her slow decline as Wildwood syndrome tightened its grip. Eleanor's love for her daughter shone through every word, a fierce, unwavering devotion that ultimately fueled her relentless pursuit of a cure. Then, the diary entries took a darker turn. Eleanor wrote of a growing unease within the community, whispers of strange occurrences, of a subtle shift in the local ecosystem. She documented unusual plant mutations and a disturbing increase in the incidence of Wildwood syndrome. Her scientific mind sought logical explanations, but a creeping sense of something more sinister began to permeate her writing. The name Rex Putnam appeared in the diary with increasing frequency. Initially, he was mentioned as a bright young man from a prominent local family, someone who had shown an interest in Eleanor's work. But the tone shifted dramatically after Sarah's death. Eleanor's entries became filled with suspicion and resentment towards Putnam, hinting at disagreements over her research, veiled threats, and a growing fear that he intended to exploit her findings for his own gain. One entry, written just weeks before the diary abruptly ended, sent a jolt of cold dread through Emily. R.P. knows about the formula. He watches me. He wants to take it, to control it. But I will not let him. Sarah's memory, the suffering of this town, it will not be in vain. Emily closed the diary, her mind reeling. Rex Putnam. The name was familiar. He was the founder and CEO of Pharmacorp, a pharmaceutical giant with a gleaming headquarters just a few towns over. What connection could he have had to Eleanor Vance, a reclusive researcher in a forgotten mansion decades ago? And what was this formula she had been so desperate to protect? Driven by a need to understand, Emily decided to visit the local historical society. Housed in a charmingly old-fashioned building in the town square, the society was a treasure trove of local history, filled with dusty photographs, old newspapers, and genealogical records. Mrs. Gable, the elderly but sharp-witted curator, greeted Emily with a warm smile. Emily explained her recent purchase of Wildwood Manor and her discovery of Eleanor Vance's journals. Mrs. Gable's eyes widened with recognition. Eleanor Vance, she murmured, a hint of sadness in her voice. A brilliant woman, a tragic story. Her daughter, Sarah, a terrible loss for this town. Emily asked about Rex Putnam's connection to the Vance family. Mrs. Gable frowned, her brow furrowed in thought. The Putnams were always a powerful family here. Old money. Rex, he was a bright boy. I remember him being quite taken with Sarah Vance when they were younger. A real tragedy when she passed. I hadn't realized he had any interest in Eleanor's work, though. Mrs. Gable led Emily to the archives, pulling out old local newspapers from the 1980s. They painstakingly went through the brittle pages, searching for any mention of Eleanor Vance, her research, or any connection to Rex Putnam. They found several articles detailing Eleanor's work on local flora and her efforts to understand Wildwood syndrome, which was described as a mysterious ailment causing fatigue, cognitive impairment, and a general decline in health among some residents. The articles painted Eleanor as a dedicated and compassionate researcher, deeply committed to her community. There was also a brief mention of Rex Putnam, then a young and ambitious entrepreneur, attending a local charity event hosted by the Vance family to raise awareness about Wildwood syndrome. The accompanying photograph showed a youthful Rex standing beside a smiling Sarah Vance, their connection seemingly genuine. But as they delved deeper, they unearthed a more unsettling piece of news. A small, almost buried article reported on a contentious town meeting where Eleanor Vance had voiced strong opposition to a proposed industrial development on the outskirts of Wildwood, arguing that it could have unforeseen consequences for the local environment and potentially exacerbate Wildwood syndrome. The developer behind the project? Putnam Industries, Rex Putnam's father's company. The article hinted at a heated exchange between Eleanor and the elder Mr. Putnam, with Eleanor expressing concerns about potential pollution and its impact on the delicate ecosystem of Wildwood. The development had ultimately gone ahead, despite Eleanor's objections. This new information cast a dark shadow over Emily's understanding of the past. Could Rex Putnam's interest in Eleanor's research have stemmed from something more than just scientific curiosity? Could the R.P. in Eleanor's diary have been a thread connected to this earlier conflict? Returning to Wildwood Manor, Emily felt a renewed sense of urgency. The secrets hidden within these walls were not just historical curiosities, they might hold the key to understanding something much larger, something that had potentially affected the entire town. The next morning, Emily decided to explore the locked laboratory in the basement more thoroughly. Dan Miller, who had become a regular fixture at the manor as he tackled the more complex repairs, helped her pry open the heavy wooden door. The air inside the lab was thick with the smell of dried herbs and chemicals. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of sunlight that pierced through a crack in the boarded-up window. Glass beakers and vials lined dusty shelves. Mortars and pestles lay scattered on a workbench. It was a snapshot of a life dedicated to scientific inquiry. Among the clutter, Emily found more research notes, meticulously detailing Eleanor's experiments with various plant extracts and their effects on the symptoms of Wildwood syndrome. There were also patient files, albeit anonymized, documenting the progress, and sometimes lack thereof, of those she had treated. Tucked away in a corner, beneath a pile of discarded cloths, Emily discovered another, smaller leather-bound book. This one was different from the others. Its pages were filled with a complex series of chemical formulas, handwritten in Eleanor's elegant script. Could this be the formula she had been so desperate to protect? As Emily carefully turned the fragile pages, a particular formula caught her eye. It was accompanied by detailed notes on its preparation and potential applications. The ingredients listed were all local plants, many of which Emily had seen growing in the overgrown gardens surrounding Wildwood Manor. But what truly made this formula stand out were the accompanying annotations. Eleanor had written about its potential to not only alleviate the symptoms of Wildwood syndrome but also to target its underlying cause. She had even speculated about its potential to treat other, related ailments. The implications were staggering. Could Eleanor Vance have stumbled upon a medical breakthrough, a natural remedy with far-reaching potential? And if so, what had happened to it? Why had it never been brought to light? That evening, the unsettling phone call came. Emily was tucking Lily and Noah into their makeshift beds in one of the least damaged rooms when the old landline phone, miraculously still connected, rang. Hesitantly, she picked it up. There was silence on the other end for a moment, then a faint rustling, followed by a low, breathy voice. "Leave it alone," the voice whispered, barely audible. "The past is best left buried. If you continue to dig, you will bring trouble to those you care about." Before Emily could respond, the line went dead. Her hand trembled as she slowly hung up the phone. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through her resolve. The warning was clear: someone didn't want her looking into Eleanor Vance's secrets. Someone was watching her. Despite the fear, a stubborn refusal to be intimidated took root within Emily. The whispered threat only strengthened her resolve. Eleanor Vance's story, the potential of her research, and the unsettling connection to Rex Putnam, she couldn't just walk away from it. The truth, whatever it might be, needed to be uncovered. And Emily Carter, a single mother who had risked everything on a dilapidated old house, was now determined to find it. The news of Emily's purchase of Wildwood Manor landed like a rogue wave amongst her small circle of family and friends, washing away their already fragile sense of her stability. Her sister, Sarah, a pragmatic accountant with a penchant for spreadsheets and worst-case scenarios, was the first to voice her vehement disapproval. "Emily, are you absolutely sure about this?" Sarah's voice crackled through the phone line, laced with a familiar blend of concern and exasperation. "A derelict mansion? With your last $900? Honey, that's not an investment, that's something out of a Gothic novel." Emily, perched on a wobbly kitchen chair amidst the packing boxes that still cluttered her small apartment, sighed. She had anticipated this reaction. Sarah, ever the responsible one, had always viewed Emily's more impulsive decisions with a wary eye. "I know it sounds crazy, Sarah," Emily said, trying to keep the defensiveness out of her voice. "But I had to do something. The eviction, we were running out of options." "Options? Emily, you could have stayed with me. The spare room is always open. We could have figured something out, a sensible plan, not this." Sarah's voice rose slightly, the unspoken again hanging heavy in the air. Emily had a history of chasing after unconventional dreams, often with less than stellar results. "I appreciate that, Sarah, I really do," Emily said softly. "But I need our own space. Lily and Noah, they need a place to call home, a real home. Not just a temporary fix. And you think that crumbling pile of bricks is going to be that home? Emily, have you even had it inspected? There could be structural damage, mold, who knows what else. You'll pour thousands into repairs, money you don't have." Sarah's logic was impeccable, her concerns valid. But Emily felt a stubborn resistance rising within her. Sarah couldn't see what Emily felt, that faint but persistent glimmer of possibility that clung to the image of Wildwood Manor. Her neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, a kind but superstitious woman who had always kept a watchful eye over Emily and her children, offered her own brand of worried counsel. "Oh, Emily dear," she said, her brow furrowed with concern as she stopped Emily in the hallway. "Wildwood Manor, that place has a bad history. They say it's haunted, you know. Unhappy spirits. And that Eleanor Vance, such a sad story. Best to leave those old places be, dear. Nothing but trouble." Even her well-meaning friends offered hesitant words of caution, their faces etched with doubt. They couldn't understand the desperation that had driven Emily, the feeling of being backed into a corner with no conventional escape route. But amidst the tide of skepticism, a small, quiet voice within Emily held firm. She had seen something in the faded photographs of Wildwood Manor, a grandeur beneath the grime, a resilience in the weathered facade that mirrored her own stubborn refusal to give up. And the low price, the sheer improbability of owning a house outright, however dilapidated, had been a gamble she felt compelled to take. As the day of the move approached, Emily focused on the practicalities, packing their meager belongings, trying to instill a sense of excitement in Lily and Noah about their new adventure. Lily, with her vivid imagination, seemed cautiously optimistic, peppering Emily with questions about secret passages and hidden rooms. Noah, as long as he had his box of dinosaurs and a place to run, was generally agreeable. The drive to Wildwood Manor was surreal. The house sat at the end of a long, winding driveway, almost swallowed by the overgrown trees and tangled vines that choked the property. It looked even more imposing and dilapidated in person than in the photographs, a silent, brooding presence against the gray autumn sky. As Emily pulled up the U-Haul truck, a sense of the enormity of her undertaking washed over her. The house loomed before them, its broken windows like vacant eyes staring into their souls. Peeling paint hung in strips like tattered flags, and the porch sagged precariously. Sarah had reluctantly agreed to help with the move, her initial protests eventually giving way to sisterly duty, albeit tinged with a healthy dose of "I told you so." As they unloaded boxes into the cavernous, dust-filled rooms, Sarah's skepticism was palpable. "Honestly, Emily," she said, wrinkling her nose at the pervasive smell of mildew, "I don't know how you're going to make this work. It's going to need a fortune just to make it habitable." "I know it's a lot of work, Sarah," Emily replied, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "But we'll take it one step at a time. We'll focus on making 1 or 2 rooms livable first." The initial days were a grueling test of endurance. Without running water or reliable electricity, they relied on bottled water, battery-powered lanterns, and a portable generator Sarah had insisted they borrow. Cleaning felt like a Sisyphean task, each cleared surface quickly recoated with another layer of dust. Lily and Noah, despite their initial curiosity, soon grew restless in the cold, drafty rooms. Emily did her best to keep their spirits up, turning the cleaning into games and telling them fantastical stories about the house's former inhabitants. It was during one of these early cleaning sessions in the dusty library that Lily had discovered the locked wooden box hidden beneath the loose floorboard. The discovery had injected a much-needed spark of intrigue into their otherwise dreary existence. As Emily spent her evenings poring over Eleanor Vance's journals, the weight of her decision to buy Wildwood Manor began to shift. It was no longer just about finding a cheap place to live, it was about uncovering a story, a mystery that seemed to resonate with a deeper part of her. The more she learned about Eleanor, her passion, her struggles, and her growing fear, the more Emily felt a connection to this long-gone woman. She felt a sense of responsibility to understand Eleanor's story, to perhaps even bring her lost research to light. The discovery of the personal diary in the library further deepened this connection. Eleanor's voice, raw with grief and tinged with suspicion, felt like a whisper across the decades, a plea for her story to be heard. The mention of Rex Putnam and the growing fear surrounding his intentions added a layer of intrigue and a hint of potential danger. The unsettling phone call a few weeks later served as a stark reminder that she might have stumbled onto something significant, something that someone wanted to remain buried. The whispered threat, though anonymous, had a chillingly personal edge, targeting her children, her most vulnerable point. Sarah, upon hearing about the call, had renewed her pleas for Emily to abandon Wildwood Manor. "Emily, this is getting serious. Someone is threatening you. This isn't just about a fixer-upper anymore. You need to think about Lily and Noah's safety." But the threat, instead of scaring Emily away, had the opposite effect. It solidified her resolve. She couldn't back down now. Eleanor Vance's story deserved to be told, and Emily felt an increasing sense that she was the one who was meant to tell it. She started spending more time at the local library, not just reading Eleanor's journals but also delving into local history, old town records, and genealogical databases. She wanted to learn everything she could about the Vance family, the Putnams, and the history of Wildwood. B.A. Evelyn Reed, the knowledgeable and kind librarian, became an invaluable resource. She helped Emily navigate the dusty archives, pointing her towards relevant documents and sharing her own recollections of the town's past. Through her research, Emily learned more about the prominence of the Vance family in Wildwood's early history, their contributions to the community, and the tragic decline that had befallen them in later years. She also found more information about Putnam Industries and its controversial development project on the outskirts of town in the 1980s, the same project Eleanor Vance had vehemently opposed. The more pieces of the puzzle Emily gathered, the clearer the picture began to emerge. Eleanor Vance had been a respected member of the community, a brilliant researcher dedicated to understanding and treating a mysterious illness that plagued their town. Her opposition to the Putnam development suggested a deep concern for the local environment and its potential impact on public health. And her growing fear of Rex Putnam hinted at a possible conflict over her research, a conflict that might have had devastating consequences. Emily knew she needed more information, more concrete evidence to understand the full story. The anonymous phone call had made her wary, but it also fueled her determination. She couldn't shake the feeling that the secrets within Wildwood Manor were not just relics of the past, but held a significance that could still impact the present. And for Eleanor Vance, for her daughter Sarah, and for the sake of her own children's future in this strange, old house, Emily was ready to face whatever dangers lay ahead. The whispers in the dust were beginning to form a coherent narrative, and Emily was listening intently. The initial days at Wildwood Manor were a stark immersion into a world of decay and neglect. The house exhaled the musty breath of decades of abandonment, a pervasive odor of damp wood, mildew, and undisturbed dust that clung to everything. The very air felt heavy, thick with microscopic particles that tickled Emily's nose and left a gritty film on every surface. The silence of the old house was a deceptive thing. It wasn't a peaceful quiet, but rather a pregnant stillness punctuated by unsettling sounds. The wind, whistling through broken window panes, created mournful sighs and eerie moans. Floorboards groaned underfoot with a disconcerting randomness, as if unseen residents were pacing the empty halls. In the dead of night, Emily would sometimes hear fainting sounds from the upper floors, noises that her weary mind struggled to rationalize as merely the settling of an old structure. The cold was relentless, seeping through the thin walls and single-pane windows, clinging to the damp air. Even with layers of clothing and the small, portable heaters Sarah had insisted on providing, a persistent chill permeated the house, a constant reminder of its disrepair. Emily and the children fell into a rudimentary routine. Mornings began with the struggle to get a fire going in one of the least damaged fireplaces, the smoky warmth offering a temporary respite from the cold. They ate simple meals prepared on a portable camping stove, the lack of a functioning kitchen a constant inconvenience. Cleaning was an overwhelming task. Each room seemed to hold centuries of accumulated grime. Cobwebs, some thick enough to resemble macabre decorations, draped from every corner, clinging to the decaying furniture like ghostly shrouds. Dust lay in thick drifts on every surface, disturbed only by their movements. Lily, initially viewing the mansion as an exciting, if slightly spooky, adventure, soon began to voice her complaints. "Mommy, it's cold," she'd shiver, wrapping her arms around herself. "And it smells funny." Noah, though more resilient, would sometimes cling to Emily, his usual boundless energy subdued by the sheer emptiness and echoing silence of the house. Emily tried her best to maintain a positive attitude, framing their efforts as a grand adventure, a mission to rescue a forgotten treasure. She told them stories about the people who had once lived in Wildwood Manor, conjuring images of elegant parties and happy families to counter the pervasive sense of decay. The discovery of Eleanor Vance's journals provided a new focus for their explorations. Lily, fascinated by the elegant handwriting and the sketches of strange plants, would often sit beside Emily as she read aloud excerpts. Noah, though less interested in the words, enjoyed finding the dried flowers and pressed leaves tucked between the pages, treating them like ancient artifacts. As Emily delved deeper into Eleanor's writings, the house began to feel less like a hostile environment and more like a repository of secrets. Each creaking floorboard, each rustle of wind seemed to whisper fragments of the past. She started to feel a strange connection to Eleanor, a sense of shared purpose in uncovering the mysteries of Wildwood Manor. One afternoon, while cleaning out the dusty library, a room that seemed to have suffered less from the elements than the others, Emily made another significant discovery. Behind a loose panel in one of the towering bookshelves, she found a collection of old photographs. The sepia-toned images offered a glimpse into the Vance family's life in their heyday. Elegant portraits of stern-faced men and women in formal attire. Lively snapshots of garden parties, children playing on the sprawling lawns, and intimate family gatherings in the grand rooms that were now filled with dust and decay. There were several photographs of Eleanor, a woman with intelligent, piercing eyes and a thoughtful expression. And there were numerous pictures of a young girl with bright, mischievous eyes and a radiant smile, Sarah, Eleanor's daughter. Emily felt a pang of sadness looking at Sarah's vibrant image, knowing her tragic fate. Among the family photos, Emily found a few that included a young man she recognized from the newspaper clipping at the Historical Society, Rex Putnam. He appeared in several pictures alongside Sarah, their youthful faces full of laughter and affection. Their connection seemed undeniable, a stark contrast to the animosity hinted at in Eleanor's diary. The photographs added another layer of complexity to the unfolding story. What had happened between Rex and Eleanor after Sarah's death to turn affection into suspicion and fear? As the days turned into weeks, Emily and the children slowly began to carve out a small, livable space within the vastness of Wildwood Manor. They concentrated on cleaning and making one of the upstairs bedrooms and a small sitting room downstairs habitable. Dan Miller, the local handyman Emily had hired, became a frequent presence, tackling the more challenging repairs, fixing leaks, securing loose floorboards, and eventually getting the electricity partially restored to a few rooms. Dan, a quiet and observant man with a deep knowledge of the town's history, often shared anecdotes about Wildwood Manor and the Vance family. He spoke of Eleanor's reputation as a brilliant but eccentric woman, dedicated to her plants and her research. He also mentioned the tragedy of Sarah's death and the subsequent withdrawal of Eleanor from public life. He seemed surprised, though not entirely dismissive, when Emily mentioned Eleanor's research into Wildwood syndrome and her concerns about the Putnam development. Old man Putnam wasn't too popular with some folks back then, Dan said one afternoon, while repairing a window frame in the library. He was a hard-nosed businessman, and he didn't always see eye to eye with the older families in town. Dan also confirmed the local rumors about Wildwood Manor being haunted. "There are folks who swear they've seen things, heard things up here over the years," he said, his gaze drifting towards the shadowy corners of the room. "But it's probably just the old house settling, the wind playing tricks." Despite his pragmatic explanation, Emily sometimes caught him glancing nervously at the darkened hallways. The partial restoration of electricity brought a small measure of comfort and normalcy to their lives. They could finally use lamps instead of relying solely on lanterns, and Lily and Noah were thrilled to be able to watch cartoons on a small, portable television Sarah had lent them. But even with these small improvements, the overwhelming sense of the house's age and decay remained. Every draft, every shadow seemed to hold a whisper of the past, a reminder of the secrets hidden within the walls of Wildwood Manor. And Emily knew, with a growing certainty, that she was only just beginning to scratch the surface of those secrets. The echoes in the empty rooms were growing louder, and she was determined to understand their story. The living room of Wildwood Manor, intended to be the heart of their new home, was arguably the most dilapidated space in the entire house. The once grand hardwood floors were warped and splintered, several planks rotten through from years of water damage. Emily had been cautiously prying at a particularly loose section near the fireplace, hoping to assess the extent of the damage, while Lily played nearby, humming softly to herself as she arranged a collection of oddly shaped stones she'd found in the overgrown yard. Noah, predictably, was engaged in a wrestling match with an imaginary dragon in a relatively dust-free corner. It was Lily who made the discovery. Her small fingers, exploring the gaps between the loose floorboards, suddenly snagged on something solid. "Mommy, look," she called out, tugging with surprising strength. Emily set aside her crowbar and knelt beside her daughter. Wedged tightly beneath one of the warped planks was a small, wooden box. It was plain in design, made of a dark, unvarnished wood that had faded with age. The lid was secured by a tarnished brass clasp, stiff with disuse. A thrill of anticipation, a familiar sense that Wildwood Manor held more secrets waiting to be unearthed, ran through Emily. She carefully worked the clasp open. Inside, nestled on a bed of dried, brittle leaves, were several small, leather-bound notebooks. Their covers were worn smooth, the spines cracked with age. The air around them carried a faint, musty scent, the aroma of time and forgotten stories. Beneath the notebooks lay a collection of loose papers, delicate and yellowed with age. These were filled with intricate sketches of various plants, their leaves, flowers, and roots rendered with remarkable detail and precision. Latin names were carefully written beside each illustration, along with handwritten notes in the margins. Tucked amongst the sketches were several sheets containing carefully penned formulas, lists of ingredients followed by precise instructions for preparation. The handwriting was elegant and flowing, the ink now faded to a soft brown in places. The name Eleanor Vance appeared repeatedly throughout the notebooks and on the loose papers, sometimes as a signature, sometimes integrated into the text. Emily carefully lifted one of the notebooks. The leather felt dry and fragile beneath her fingertips. She gently opened the cover, revealing pages filled with the same elegant script she had seen on the loose papers. The entries were dated, the earliest ones going back several decades. The initial entries were filled with observations about the natural world, detailed descriptions of the changing seasons in Wildwood, and meticulous notes on the local flora. Eleanor wrote with a keen scientific eye, documenting the growth patterns, flowering cycles, and unique characteristics of each plant she studied. As Emily turned the pages, the focus of Eleanor's writing gradually shifted towards the medicinal properties of these plants. She detailed her experiments, her attempts to extract and isolate compounds, and her observations on their effects. The language became more technical, filled with botanical terms and chemical notations that were beyond Emily's understanding. But interspersed with the scientific observations were more personal reflections. Eleanor wrote of her hopes and dreams, her deep connection to the land, and her growing concern about the health of her small community. The recurring mention of a mysterious ailment, one she initially referred to as the wasting sickness, and her determination to find a natural remedy, began to weave a compelling narrative. As Emily continued to read, the name Sarah began to appear in the journals. Eleanor's entries about her daughter were filled with a tender, almost heartbreaking love. She chronicled Sarah's childhood, her bright spirit, and then, with increasing anguish, the onset of the debilitating illness that would eventually be identified as Wildwood syndrome. The journals became a poignant record of a mother's desperate fight to save her child. Eleanor meticulously documented Sarah's symptoms, her attempts to alleviate her suffering with various herbal remedies, and her growing frustration as the wasting sickness tightened its grip. Mixed in with these personal entries were Eleanor's research notes on Wildwood syndrome. She described its insidious progression, the debilitating fatigue, the cognitive decline, the way it seemed to steal the very life force from its victims. Her scientific observations were interwoven with her raw emotional pain, creating a powerful and moving account of a mother's love and a scientist's relentless pursuit of knowledge. The loose papers containing the plant sketches and formulas seemed to be directly related to Eleanor's research into Wildwood syndrome. Emily carefully examined the detailed drawings, recognizing some of the plants growing wild around Wildwood Manor. The formulas were complex, involving multiple ingredients and intricate preparation methods. They hinted at a deep understanding of the synergistic properties of different herbs. As Emily continued to explore the box's contents, she found a small, folded piece of paper tucked inside one of the notebooks. It was a letter, its paper thin and brittle with age. The handwriting was the same elegant script as the journals, but the tone was different, filled with a quiet despair. The letter was addressed to an unnamed recipient and spoke of Eleanor's growing fears. She wrote of feeling isolated and misunderstood, of facing resistance to her unconventional methods. She hinted at powerful forces that might seek to suppress her research, forces driven by greed and a disregard for the well-being of the community. The letter ended with a plea, "If anything should happen to me, please ensure that my work is not lost. The answer lies within these pages, the hope for our future." Emily carefully refolded the letter, her heart heavy with a sense of responsibility. Eleanor Vance's journals were more than just historical artifacts, they were a testament to a life dedicated to healing, a desperate fight against a mysterious illness, and a warning about potential threats to her work. The discovery of the box and its contents transformed Wildwood Manor in Emily's eyes. It was no longer just a dilapidated old house she had impulsively bought, it was a treasure trove of lost knowledge, a place where the echoes of the past held the key to understanding the present. The name Eleanor Vance, once just a name associated with a forgotten mansion, now represented a story that Emily felt compelled to uncover, a legacy she felt a duty to protect. The faded ink on the aged pages seemed to whisper a promise, a challenge to unravel the secrets held within the whispering walls of Wildwood Manor. Emily became utterly engrossed in Eleanor Vance's journals. The faded ink on the brittle pages transported her to another era, into the secluded world of a woman consumed by a singular purpose. Eleanor's life at Wildwood Manor, as depicted in her diaries, was one of quiet dedication, a solitary existence punctuated by the rhythms of the natural world and the meticulous demands of her research. Eleanor wrote with a lyrical precision about the flora of the surrounding woodlands, her descriptions painting vivid pictures of sun-dappled glades carpeted with wildflowers, ancient oaks reaching their gnarled branches towards the sky, and hidden streams teeming with life. She possessed an intimate knowledge of each plant, noting its unique characteristics, its preferred growing conditions, and the subtle changes it underwent throughout the seasons. Her passion extended beyond mere observation. Eleanor was a true botanist, meticulously documenting her findings, cross-referencing her observations with ancient texts and the folk remedies passed down through generations in the Wildwood community. She experimented tirelessly, grinding roots, steeping leaves, and extracting oils, her makeshift laboratory in the basement a testament to her unwavering commitment. The journals revealed the genesis of her focus on what she eventually termed Wildwood syndrome. Initially, the entries spoke of isolated incidents, local whispers of a persistent malaise affecting certain individuals in the community. Eleanor, with her scientific curiosity and compassionate heart, began to investigate these reports, meticulously documenting the symptoms described by those afflicted. As more cases emerged, a disturbing pattern began to take shape. The symptoms, as Eleanor recorded them, were varied yet interconnected. A profound and unshakable fatigue that went beyond mere tiredness. A noticeable decline in cognitive function, characterized by memory lapses, difficulty concentrating, and a general mental fog. Physical weakness, muscle aches, and a persistent feeling of being unwell, despite the absence of any readily identifiable disease. Eleanor's early attempts to understand the wasting sickness, as it was initially known, involved consultations with the local doctor, a kindly but somewhat old-fashioned man who confessed himself baffled by the ailment. Traditional remedies offered little relief, and the afflicted individual seemed to fade slowly, their vitality ebbing away with no apparent cause. Driven by a sense of urgency, especially as her own daughter, Sarah, began to exhibit the telltale signs of the illness, Eleanor intensified her research. Her journals became a chronicle of her relentless pursuit of a natural cure. She explored the possibility of environmental factors, meticulously testing the water and soil around Wildwood, but found no conclusive evidence of contamination. Her focus gradually narrowed to the unique plant life of the region. Eleanor hypothesized that a specific plant, or perhaps an imbalance in the local ecosystem, might be contributing to the illness. She spent countless hours collecting specimens, dissecting them, and analyzing their properties. The journals detailed her painstaking process of trial and error. She experimented with various herbal preparations, carefully noting their effects, both positive and negative, on herself and, later, on Sarah and a few brave local individuals who volunteered to participate in her informal trials. Some remedies offered temporary relief from specific symptoms, but none seemed to address the underlying cause of the debilitating syndrome. As Sarah's condition worsened, a palpable desperation crept into Eleanor's writing. Her scientific objectivity was increasingly intertwined with a mother's raw grief and fear. The journals became a testament to her unwavering love for Sarah, a desperate race against time to unlock the secrets held within the natural world before the illness claimed her daughter. The evolution of the name from the wasting sickness to Wildwood syndrome reflected Eleanor's growing understanding that this was a distinct and localized ailment, deeply connected to the unique environment of their community. She theorized about a potential imbalance in the delicate ecosystem, perhaps triggered by an external factor, that was somehow manifesting as this debilitating illness in susceptible individuals. Eleanor's detailed sketches and formulas provided further insight into her research. She seemed particularly interested in a specific cluster of plants that grew in a secluded area of the Wildwood forest, near a stream she referred to as Whispering Creek. Her notes suggested that these plants possessed unique chemical properties, some potentially harmful in isolation but perhaps holding the key to a cure when combined in the right proportions. Emily spent hours poring over these sketches, comparing them to the plants growing in the overgrown gardens of Wildwood Manor and the surrounding woods. She recognized several of the species Eleanor had meticulously illustrated, a tangible link to the researcher who had walked the same land decades ago. The formulas were more challenging to decipher. Eleanor used a combination of botanical names, common names, and her own cryptic abbreviations. Some ingredients were familiar, while others were obscure, their identities lost to time or local dialect. Yet, Emily was struck by the complexity and precision of the preparations, suggesting a deep understanding of herbal medicine and pharmacology that went far beyond simple folk remedies. As she continued to read, Emily noticed a shift in Eleanor's focus. The later entries hinted at a growing suspicion, a sense that the Wildwood syndrome might not be entirely natural in origin. Eleanor wrote of unusual environmental changes, subtle alterations in the local flora, and a disturbing increase in the illness's prevalence following the development of the Putnam Industries plant on the edge of Wildwood. Her entries became more guarded, filled with veiled allusions and a growing fear of being watched. The name R.P. began to appear with increasing frequency, always accompanied by expressions of anxiety and distrust. Eleanor clearly believed that this individual posed a threat to her research, perhaps seeking to exploit it or suppress it for reasons she didn't fully understand. The journals painted a picture of a woman increasingly isolated, her dedication to her research bordering on obsession as she raced against time to find a cure for Sarah and to understand the true nature of Wildwood syndrome. Her life at Wildwood Manor became a self-imposed exile, her only companions the rustling leaves, the whispering wind, and the secrets she sought to unlock within the natural world. Emily felt a profound sense of empathy for Eleanor, a shared understanding of a mother's fierce love and the desperation of facing a child's suffering. She also felt a growing sense of unease about the later entries, the hints of external threats and the ominous presence of R.P. The idyllic image of a solitary researcher in her woodland haven was being overshadowed by a darker narrative, one involving potential corporate greed and a community unknowingly afflicted by a mysterious illness with potentially unnatural origins. The whispers in the dust were beginning to carry a more sinister tone, and Emily knew she had only just begun to unravel the complex web of secrets surrounding Eleanor Vance and Wildwood Manor. Noah, ever the intrepid explorer of Wildwood Manor's dusty corners, was the one to unearth the next piece of the puzzle. While Emily was meticulously cataloging Eleanor's botanical sketches in the library, Noah was hunting for dragons, as he called it, in the least damaged sitting room. His explorations led him to a large, ornate painting hanging slightly askew on the wall. It was a portrait of a stern-looking gentleman in Victorian attire, his gaze following Noah around the room. Curiosity piqued, Noah tugged at the bottom corner of the painting. It swung inward slightly, revealing a shallow recess in the wall behind it. Nestled within the space, almost hidden from view, was another small, leather-bound book. Its cover was plainer than the journals, the leather more worn and supple. This one felt different, less like a personal diary and more like a working document. "Mommy! I found another book!" Noah's excited shout echoed through the quiet house. Emily, her heart quickening with anticipation, joined him in the sitting room. The book Noah had discovered was indeed another of Eleanor Vance's notebooks, but its contents were markedly different from the personal reflections and botanical observations of the journals. This was a meticulous record of her early clinical trials, a detailed account of her attempts to treat Wildwood syndrome in the local community. The entries were structured with a scientific rigor. Each participant was assigned an initial, often anonymized, identifier. Eleanor carefully documented their symptoms, their medical history, and the specific herbal preparations she administered. The dosages, methods of preparation, and frequency of treatment were all recorded with painstaking precision. The early entries were filled with a sense of cautious optimism. Eleanor described instances where her remedies appeared to alleviate some of the debilitating symptoms of Wildwood syndrome. Patients reported feeling a slight increase in energy, a mild improvement in cognitive clarity, and a temporary easing of muscle aches. Eleanor's notes reflected her hope that she was finally on the right track, that her research was beginning to yield tangible results. However, as Emily continued to read, a more troubling picture began to emerge. Alongside the accounts of initial successes were increasingly frequent entries detailing adverse reactions and unexpected side effects. Some participants experienced gastrointestinal distress, others reported headaches and dizziness, and in a few more concerning cases, Eleanor noted more severe reactions, including skin rashes and a temporary worsening of their overall condition. Eleanor's meticulous record-keeping extended to these negative outcomes as well. She carefully documented the symptoms, the timeline of their appearance, and her attempts to adjust the dosages or modify the herbal preparations to mitigate the side effects. Her notes revealed a scientist grappling with the complexities of her research, acutely aware of the delicate balance between potential benefit and potential harm. One entry, dated several months after the initial trials began, was particularly sobering. Eleanor wrote of a participant, identified only as Subject C, who had initially shown significant improvement but subsequently experienced a severe relapse accompanied by alarming neurological symptoms. Eleanor's notes conveyed her deep distress and her agonizing decision to discontinue treatment for this individual. The entry concluded with a poignant reflection: the path to healing is fraught with peril. I must proceed with the utmost caution, for the well-being of these dear souls entrusted to my care is paramount. The power of nature is immense, but its application must be guided by wisdom and unwavering vigilance. As Emily read these accounts, a knot of unease tightened in her stomach. Eleanor Vance was not simply a benevolent herbalist, she was a scientist conducting experimental treatments, and her early trials were clearly not without their risks. The successes she had initially celebrated were often followed by troubling setbacks, and the potential for harm was undeniably present. This new information complicated Emily's perception of Eleanor. She was still a dedicated researcher driven by a desire to heal, but her methods appeared to be more experimental, more uncertain than Emily had initially imagined. The line between groundbreaking discovery and unintended harm seemed precariously thin. Further entries in the notebook detailed Eleanor's growing frustration and her attempts to refine her formulas and identify the specific compounds responsible for both the therapeutic effects and the adverse reactions. She experimented with isolating individual plant extracts, meticulously documenting their properties and their effects on her trial participants. The notebook also revealed Eleanor's ethical struggles. She grappled with the responsibility of administering untested treatments, wrestling with the potential benefits versus the inherent risks. Her notes contained heartfelt pleas for guidance and wisdom, reflecting the heavy burden she carried as she sought to alleviate the suffering of her community. One recurring theme in the later entries was Eleanor's increasing concern about the long-term effects of her treatments. Even in cases where participants showed initial improvement, she worried about potential delayed reactions or unforeseen consequences. This cautious approach suggested a deep sense of responsibility and a commitment to thoroughness, even in the face of mounting pressure to find a quick cure. The discovery of this clinical trial notebook added a significant layer of complexity to the story of Eleanor Vance and her research. It revealed the messy reality of scientific discovery, the inevitable setbacks and ethical dilemmas that often accompany the pursuit of knowledge. Eleanor was not portrayed as a flawless visionary but as a dedicated and fallible human being, striving to make a difference in the face of a mysterious and debilitating illness. Emily began to see Eleanor's isolation in a new light. Perhaps her withdrawal from the community was not solely due to grief over Sarah's death, but also a consequence of the challenges and potential failures of her clinical trials. The weight of responsibility for the well-being of her participants, coupled with the inherent uncertainties of her experimental treatments, might have led her to retreat into the solitary world of Wildwood Manor. The notebook also raised new questions about the formula Eleanor had been so desperate to protect. Was it a refined version of one of her earlier experimental preparations, one where she had managed to overcome the problematic side effects? Or was it something entirely new, a breakthrough she had achieved later in her research, perhaps after the period covered by this particular notebook? Emily felt a growing sense that the full story of Eleanor Vance and Wildwood syndrome was far more intricate and nuanced than she had initially imagined. The journals had provided a personal narrative and a glimpse into Eleanor's botanical knowledge, but this clinical trial notebook offered a more objective, albeit still deeply personal, account of her scientific endeavors and the inherent challenges she faced. The whispers in the walls of Wildwood Manor were not just tales of lost love and potential danger, they were also echoes of experimentation, of the arduous and often uncertain path towards medical discovery. And Emily knew that understanding the complexities of Eleanor's research was crucial to unlocking the secrets hidden within this old house. With Eleanor Vance's journals and clinical trial notebook fueling a growing number of questions, Emily knew she needed to delve deeper into the history of Wildwood and the Vance family. The local library, a stately brick building with ivy climbing its walls, seemed like the most logical place to start. B.A. Evelyn Reed, the town librarian, was a fixture in Wildwood, a woman whose knowledge of local history was as vast and well organized as the countless volumes under her care. Her silver hair was neatly pulled back in a bun, and her kind eyes, magnified by thick-rimmed glasses, held a gentle wisdom. Emily found her browsing the local history section, her fingers tracing the spines of well-worn books. "Excuse me, Mrs. Reed." Emily began hesitantly. The librarian turned, a warm smile gracing her lips. "Yes, dear. Can I help you find something?" Emily introduced herself, explaining her recent acquisition of Wildwood Manor. B.A. Evelyn's eyes widened with a mixture of surprise and recognition. Wildwood Manor. My goodness, it's been empty for so long. We all wondered when someone would finally take an interest. Emily explained her discovery of Eleanor Vance's journals and her growing fascination with the researcher and her work. B.A. Evelyn's smile softened, a hint of melancholy entering her gaze. Eleanor Vance, a brilliant woman. A tragic figure, really. The Vance family was one of the oldest and most respected in Wildwood. They contributed so much to this town in its early days. B.A. Evelyn led Emily to a comfortable armchair near a sun-drenched window. "Please, have a seat, dear. Tell me what you found." "I knew Eleanor, though I was just a girl when tragedy struck." Emily recounted her discovery of the journals, the botanical sketches, and the clinical trial notebook. She spoke of Eleanor's dedication to understanding Wildwood syndrome and her tireless efforts to find a cure. B.A. Evelyn listened intently, her expression thoughtful. "Wildwood syndrome," she murmured. "That's what Eleanor eventually called it?" "Before that, folks just whispered about the wasting sickness. It was a troubling time. Several families were affected, their loved ones growing weaker, their minds clouding over. The doctors were stumped." B.A. Evelyn shared her own recollections of Eleanor Vance. She was a remarkable woman, even then. Fiercely intelligent, with a deep connection to the natural world. She spent countless hours in the woods, studying the plants. Some folks thought she was a bit eccentric, living out there on her own, so consumed by her research. But there was no denying her dedication. Emily then broached the subject of Sarah Vance. B.A. Evelyn's eyes clouded with sadness. "Oh, Sarah, such a sweet child. Full of life and laughter. She was Eleanor's only daughter, her pride and joy. It was heartbreaking when she fell ill. Eleanor devoted herself entirely to finding a cure for Sarah. She tried everything, you know. Every old remedy, every new idea she had. But it wasn't enough." B.A. Evelyn's voice trailed off, heavy with unspoken sorrow. "Eleanor never truly recovered from losing Sarah," she continued after a moment. "She became even more reclusive, throwing herself deeper into her research. The light seemed to go out of her eyes after Sarah passed. It was a terrible blow to the Vance family, and to the whole town." Emily asked B.A. Evelyn about the circumstances surrounding Eleanor's own departure from Wildwood. B.A. Evelyn sighed. "That's a sad story, dear. After Sarah died, Eleanor became very withdrawn. She rarely left Wildwood Manor. Then, one day, she was just gone. No one saw her leave. Her house was empty, her research left behind. There were rumors, of course. Some said she couldn't bear the memories and simply left to start a new life somewhere else. Others whispered darker things." "Darker things?" Emily prompted, a sense of unease creeping into her. B.A. Evelyn hesitated, her gaze drifting towards the window. "Well, there were always whispers about the Putnam family. They had become quite powerful in Wildwood, especially after Mr. Putnam's industrial development went through. Eleanor had strongly opposed that project, you know. She was worried about its impact on the environment, on the very things she was studying." "Did she have any specific concerns?" Emily asked, recalling the newspaper article she had found. "She did," B.A. Evelyn confirmed. "Eleanor believed that the development could disrupt the delicate balance of the local ecosystem and potentially exacerbate the Wildwood syndrome. She presented her findings at town meetings, but, well, the Putnams had a lot of influence. B.A. Evelyn leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Some folks even said that there were heated arguments between Eleanor and Mr. Putnam. Strong words exchanged. After Eleanor disappeared, some wondered if the Putnams might have had something to do with it. But there was never any proof, of course. Just whispers. Emily's mind raced. The Putnam development, Eleanor's opposition, her concerns about the environment and Wildwood syndrome, and now these unsettling whispers about the family's potential involvement in her disappearance. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fit together in a disturbing way. She then asked B.A. Evelyn about Rex Putnam's relationship with the Vance family. B.A. Evelyn's expression softened again. Rex, he was a charming young man. He and Sarah were quite close when they were children. Sweethearts, some might have said. It was a real shame. Sarah's passing hit him hard, I think. Did he ever show any interest in Eleanor's research? Emily inquired. B.A. Evelyn frowned, her brow furrowed in thought. Not that I recall, dear. After Sarah died, he seemed to focus more on his studies and then on building his father's company. I don't remember him ever discussing Eleanor's work. But then again, Eleanor kept to herself quite a bit in those later years. Emily spent several hours at the library that day, poring over old local newspapers and town records with B.A. Evelyn's assistance. They found more articles detailing the controversy surrounding the Putnam development and Eleanor Vance's vocal opposition. They also uncovered genealogical records that confirmed the close proximity of the Vance and Putnam properties and documented several instances of land disputes between the two families over the years. As the afternoon drew to a close, Emily thanked B.A. Evelyn for her invaluable help. She left the library with a head full of information and a growing sense that the secrets of Wildwood Manor were deeply intertwined with the history of the town and the powerful Putnam family. The whispers she had heard within the old house were now being echoed in the stories and recollections of the town's keeper of lore. And Emily knew that her search for the truth had only just begun. The lingering unease B.A. Evelyn Reed had conveyed about the Vance and Putnam families settled like a cold weight in Emily's stomach. The idyllic image of Wildwood, a quaint town nestled amidst rolling hills and ancient forests, was beginning to crack, revealing a darker undercurrent of old rivalries and simmering resentments. The Historical Society, housed in a grand Victorian building a few blocks from the library, proved to be another valuable resource. Its archives held a wealth of information about the town's founding families, their contributions, and their conflicts. Emily spent hours poring over old maps, land deeds, and newspaper clippings, piecing together the intricate tapestry of Wildwood's past. The Vance family, as B.A. Evelyn had indicated, had been among the town's earliest settlers, their influence stretching back to the 18th century. They had been landowners, philanthropists, and pillars of the community, their name synonymous with prosperity and civic responsibility. The Putnam family, while also established, had risen to prominence more recently, their wealth derived from industrial ventures that had transformed the town's economy in the 20th century. The old land deeds revealed a pattern of overlapping property lines and disputed boundaries between the Vance and Putnam estates. The records detailed several instances of legal battles, some stretching over decades, as the two families clashed over access rights, water usage, and mineral rights. These disputes, though seemingly mundane, hinted at a deeper animosity, a sense of entrenched rivalry that had persisted across generations. The newspaper clippings further illuminated the strained relationship between the two families. Articles from the early 20th century documented public disagreements over town policies, with the Vances advocating for conservation and preservation of the natural environment, while the Putnams championed industrial development and economic expansion. The contrasting philosophies reflected a fundamental clash of values, a struggle between the old guard and the new. As Emily delved deeper, she discovered a particularly contentious episode involving the construction of a dam on the Wildwood River. The Vances, citing concerns about the dam's impact on the local ecosystem, had vehemently opposed the project, while the Putnams, who stood to benefit from the increased industrial capacity, had pushed for its approval. The resulting legal battle had divided the town, pitting neighbor against neighbor and leaving a lasting scar on the community's social fabric. The more Emily learned, the clearer it became that the Vance and Putnam families were not simply distant acquaintances, they were entrenched rivals, their histories intertwined with a legacy of conflict and resentment. This realization cast a new light on Eleanor Vance's opposition to the Putnam Industries development in the 1980s. Her concerns about environmental impact were not merely abstract, they were rooted in a deep-seated distrust of the Putnam family and their methods. The discovery of Eleanor's clinical trial notebook added another layer of complexity to the situation. Her experimental treatments, though well-intentioned, carried inherent risks. The potential for adverse side effects, the ethical dilemmas she faced, and the pressure to find a cure for her daughter, all of these factors might have contributed to her isolation and her growing paranoia. Emily began to wonder if Eleanor's fears about R.P. were solely related to her research or if they were also fueled by the long-standing animosity between the two families. The whispers B.A. Evelyn had mentioned, the rumors of the Putnams' potential involvement in Eleanor's disappearance, suddenly seemed more credible. The image of Rex Putnam, the charming young man from the photographs, standing beside Sarah Vance, was juxtaposed against the growing suspicion surrounding his family's actions. What had transformed their youthful affection into the animosity hinted at in Eleanor's journals? What role had Rex played in the unfolding drama? Emily decided to seek out Dan Miller, the local handyman who had become a regular fixture at Wildwood Manor. Dan's knowledge of the town and its residents, coupled with his pragmatic approach, made him a valuable source of information. Dan, Emily began, as he was repairing a leaky pipe in the kitchen, do you know much about the Putnam family? Dan paused, wiping his hands on a rag. The Putnams. They're the big shots around here. Always have been. Old man Putnam built his empire on the mills and the chemical plant. Rex, his son, took over and expanded the company, Pharmacorp, into what it is today. What about their relationship with the Vance family? Emily asked. Dan frowned. That's a complicated story. The Vances were the old money, you know. The Putnams were the newcomers, the industrialists. There was always a bit of tension between them. Land disputes, business rivalries, the usual small-town stuff, but amplified because of their positions. B.A. Evelyn mentioned that Eleanor Vance opposed the Putnam Industries development, Emily said. Dan nodded. Yeah, that was a mess. Eleanor was pretty vocal about her concerns. She had some theories about environmental damage and its effects on the town's health. Old man Putnam didn't take kindly to the criticism. Do you think there was any truth to her concerns? Emily asked. Dan shrugged. Who knows? The plant's been there for years, and most folks are fine. But Eleanor was a smart woman. She knew her stuff. And she wasn't one to make things up. Emily hesitated, then decided to broach the subject of Eleanor's disappearance. What about the rumors B.A. Evelyn mentioned? About the Putnams being involved? Dan's expression turned serious. Look, Emily, those are just rumors. Old town gossip. There's never been any proof. But, there are folks who still wonder. Eleanor just vanished, you know. No note, no explanation. It was unsettling. Do you think Rex Putnam might know something? Emily asked. Dan considered her question. Rex, he's a powerful man. He's always been smooth, charming. But there's something cold about him. Something calculating. I wouldn't put anything past him. Emily thanked Dan for his honesty. She left the kitchen with a renewed sense of urgency. The shadows of the past were growing longer, the whispers louder. The animosity between the Vance and Putnam families, the potential environmental impact of the Putnam Industries plant, and the lingering mystery of Eleanor's disappearance, All of these threads were converging, weaving a complex and potentially dangerous web. And Emily was determined to unravel it, no matter the cost. The dilapidated state of Wildwood Manor presented a daunting array of repairs, far beyond Emily's limited skills and budget. Recognizing the need for professional help, she sought recommendations around town for a reliable handyman. Dan Miller's name came up repeatedly. He was described as a skilled craftsman, honest, and, importantly for Emily, reasonably priced. When Emily contacted him, Dan was initially hesitant. Wildwood Manor had a reputation, and not a good one. But Emily's earnestness and the sheer scale of the work eventually convinced him to take on the job. He arrived a few days later, his pickup truck filled with tools and a pragmatic air about him. Dan was a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. He assessed the structural issues with a keen eye, pointing out areas of concern: rotted beams, a sagging porch roof, and significant water damage in the attic. He didn't sugarcoat the extent of the repairs needed, but he also offered practical, cost-effective solutions. As he worked, a comfortable camaraderie developed between Emily and Dan. He was a quiet observer, but he often answered Emily's questions about the house and the town with thoughtful responses. He had grown up in Wildwood, his family having lived there for generations, and he possessed a deep knowledge of the local history and its inhabitants. Emily soon learned that Dan was well aware of the Vance family's history and the tragic story of Eleanor and Sarah. He spoke of Eleanor with a mixture of respect and a hint of the town's general perception of her eccentricity. "She was a smart woman, no doubt," he said one afternoon, while replacing some rotten floorboards in the hallway. "But she kept to herself mostly. Folks didn't always understand her." He also knew about the rumors surrounding Wildwood Manor. "Oh yeah, the stories have been going around for years," he chuckled, a hint of something else in his eyes. "Ghosts, strange noises, the feeling of being watched. It's an old house. Old houses tend to collect stories, whether they're true or not." Emily, emboldened by their growing rapport, eventually broached the subject of Eleanor Vance's disappearance. Dan's demeanor shifted, his usual easygoing nature replaced by a more somber thoughtfulness. "That was a strange time," he said, pausing his work. "Eleanor was just gone. One day she was there, the next, nothing. Her car was still in the garage. Her belongings were all inside. It was like she just vanished into thin air." "Did the police ever investigate?" Emily asked. Dan nodded. "Sheriff's department looked into it, but they didn't find anything. No signs of foul play, no note, no witnesses. Some folks thought she'd finally had enough of the solitude and moved away without telling anyone. But it never really sat right with most people." "Why not?" Emily pressed. Dan leaned against the wall, his gaze distant. "Eleanor wasn't the type to just up and leave, not without a word. Especially not after everything she'd been through with Sarah. This house, it was her sanctuary, her whole world, really, after her daughter died." He then lowered his voice, a hint of the local whispers creeping in. "And then there were the rumors, of course." "The rumors about the Putnams?" Emily asked, anticipating his response. Dan nodded slowly. "The Vance and Putnam families, they never did get along. Land disputes going way back. And then there was Eleanor's fight against the Putnam Industries plant. She made some powerful enemies with that. There were folks who wouldn't have been sorry to see her gone." "Did you ever hear anything specific?" Emily asked, her heart pounding slightly. Dan hesitated, glancing around the empty room as if the very walls had ears. "Just talk, you know. Whispers down at the diner, old stories passed around. Nothing you could take to the sheriff. But the feeling was, well, that the Putnams might have had a hand in it somehow. Maybe they pressured her to stop her opposition to the plant. Maybe something more." He shook his head, as if dismissing the darker possibilities. Like I said, just rumors. But Eleanor's disappearance, it's always been a shadow hanging over this town. As Dan continued his work over the following days, Emily often found herself seeking his company, drawing him into conversations about the town's history and the Vance family. He shared anecdotes about Eleanor's eccentric habits, her deep knowledge of the local flora, and her unwavering dedication to her research. He also recounted stories about the Putnam family's rise to prominence and their sometimes ruthless business practices. Through Dan's stories, Emily gained a richer understanding of the social dynamics of Wildwood and the complex relationships between its prominent families. The Vance family represented the old guard, their wealth and influence rooted in land ownership and tradition. The Putnams were the newcomers, their power derived from industry and economic might. The clash between these two worlds had created fault lines within the community that had never fully healed. Dan also shared some of the more colorful local legends surrounding Wildwood Manor. Tales of secret passages, hidden treasures, and, of course, the ever-present rumors of ghostly apparitions. While Emily remained skeptical of the supernatural, these stories added to the mansion's mystique and underscored its long and often troubled history. One afternoon, while they were working in the library, Emily showed Dan some of Eleanor's botanical sketches and the formulas from her clinical trial notebook. Dan, though not a scientist, recognized some of the local plants depicted. "That's bloodroot," he said, pointing to a detailed drawing. "Old folks used to use that for all sorts of things. And that one, that's witch hazel. Good for skin problems." His knowledge of local folklore and traditional remedies provided a different perspective on Eleanor's research. Emily also showed him the letter she had found, the one where Eleanor expressed her fears and hinted at powerful forces seeking to suppress her work. Dan read it carefully, his brow furrowed. "She was scared," he said quietly. "Scared of someone. And she believed her research was important, that it could help people." Dan's down-to-earth perspective and his deep connection to the town and its history provided Emily with a valuable counterpoint to her own increasingly theoretical investigations. He grounded her in the reality of Wildwood and its people, reminding her that the secrets of the past had real consequences for the present. As Dan continued to repair the physical structure of Wildwood Manor, Emily felt like he was also helping her to piece together its fragmented history. His tales and insights, combined with Eleanor's journals and notebooks, were slowly illuminating the shadows of the past, hinting at a story far more complex and potentially dangerous than she had ever imagined. The whispers surrounding Wildwood Manor were not just the sound of wind through broken windows, they were echoes of a troubled history, and Dan Miller was helping Emily to finally hear them. The more Emily immersed herself in Eleanor Vance's journals, the more she felt a profound connection to the long-gone researcher. She traced the elegant script with her fingers, feeling the weight of Eleanor's hopes, her frustrations, and her unwavering dedication to unraveling the mysteries of Wildwood syndrome. The journals became Emily's constant companions, illuminating the secluded life of a brilliant mind grappling with a debilitating illness and the secrets held within the natural world. As she neared the end of the last journal in the wooden box, a palpable shift occurred in Eleanor's writing. The meticulous scientific observations and heartfelt reflections became increasingly fragmented, punctuated by anxieties and a growing sense of dread. It was in these final entries that the mysterious figure known only as R.P. emerged as a looming presence, casting a dark shadow over Eleanor's work and her peace of mind. Initially, R.P. was mentioned obliquely, a fleeting reference to a potential obstacle or a source of professional disagreement. But as Eleanor's research progressed, and as she believed herself to be on the verge of a significant breakthrough, the mentions of R.P. became more frequent and more fraught with fear. Eleanor wrote of feeling watched, of sensing a persistent scrutiny that made her uneasy. She described unexplained occurrences, papers rearranged in her laboratory, unfamiliar vehicles seen near the property, hushed conversations overheard in town that seemed to cease abruptly when she approached. These incidents, though seemingly minor in isolation, contributed to a growing sense of paranoia, a feeling that her secluded world was being slowly encroached upon. The entries concerning R.P. often coincided with Eleanor's growing confidence in her research. She wrote with increasing excitement about a particular formula, one she believed held the key to not only alleviating the symptoms of Wildwood syndrome but also addressing its underlying cause. Her descriptions of this potential breakthrough were filled with a renewed sense of hope, a feeling that Sarah's suffering and her own tireless efforts might finally yield a positive outcome. However, this optimism was consistently tempered by her fear of R.P. Eleanor clearly believed that this individual was aware of her progress and was determined to seize her research for their own purposes. She used cautious language when referring to her breakthrough, often employing vague terms and allusions, as if fearing that her very words could be intercepted. One entry read, "The answer is so close, I can almost grasp it. The golden blend, as I have come to call it, shows remarkable promise. But I feel eyes upon me, a shadow lurking just beyond the trees. R.P. knows. I can sense it. I must be more careful, more discreet. This knowledge cannot fall into the wrong hands." Another entry, written just days later, conveyed a heightened sense of urgency. "I fear my time is running out. R.P. has been asking questions in town, subtle inquiries about my work, about the plants I collect. I have seen his associates, men with hard eyes and an air of authority that chills me to the bone, watching Wildwood Manor from the road. I must secure my research, find a way to protect it from his grasp." The final entries in the journal were the most unsettling. Eleanor's handwriting became shaky, the sentences more disjointed, filled with a sense of desperation and impending doom. She wrote of sleepless nights, of feeling trapped and vulnerable in her own home. One particularly disturbing entry consisted of only a few fragmented sentences. "He knows about the hidden lab, the formula. Sarah's sacrifice. I will not let him profit from our pain, must find a safe place, they are coming." The last entry was simply a single, underlined initial, E.V. It was as if Eleanor had been interrupted, the final thought left unfinished, hanging in the air like a silent scream. Emily closed the journal, her heart pounding in her chest. The final pages left her with a chilling certainty. R.P. was not just a rival or a professional adversary, he was a significant threat, someone Eleanor feared with every fiber of her being. And his pursuit of her research seemed directly linked to her sudden and unexplained disappearance. The pieces of the puzzle were clicking into place, forming a disturbing picture of corporate greed, personal betrayal, and a desperate struggle to protect a life-altering discovery. The golden blend, the formula Eleanor believed held the key to treating Wildwood syndrome, was clearly the object of R.P.'s desire. And the mention of the hidden lab suggested that Eleanor had taken measures to safeguard her work. Emily's mind raced, trying to connect the dots. Who was R.P.? The most obvious suspect was Rex Putnam. His family's history of conflict with the Vances, his company's potential interest in a medical breakthrough related to a local ailment, and the unsettling rumors surrounding Eleanor's disappearance all pointed in his direction. The photographs Emily had found, showing a youthful Rex Putnam alongside Eleanor's daughter, Sarah, added another layer of complexity. What had happened between them? Could his interest in Eleanor's research have originated from a more personal connection, a twisted sense of obligation, or perhaps even guilt related to Sarah's illness? The fragmented final entry, with its mention of Sarah's sacrifice, was particularly haunting. What sacrifice had Sarah made? Had she been involved in Eleanor's research in some way? Had her death somehow fueled Eleanor's determination to find a cure and protect her findings from those who would exploit them? Emily knew she needed to learn more about Rex Putnam, about his relationship with the Vance family, and about Pharmacorp's potential interest in Wildwood syndrome or related ailments. The anonymous phone call, the veiled threats, they all underscored the fact that she had stumbled onto something dangerous, something that someone powerful wanted to keep hidden. Despite the growing sense of peril, Emily felt a renewed sense of purpose. Eleanor Vance's story deserved to be told, her research deserved to be brought to light, and the truth behind her disappearance needed to be uncovered. The whispers in the walls of Wildwood Manor were no longer just echoes of the past, they were a call to action, a demand for justice. And Emily Carter, the unlikely inheritor of Eleanor's secrets, was determined to answer that call. Her next step was clear: she needed to delve deeper into the life and career of Rex Putnam, to uncover his connection to Eleanor Vance and to understand the true value of the golden blend that had driven someone to such desperate measures. The shadow of R.P. loomed large, and Emily knew that confronting it would be the most dangerous undertaking of her life. The mounting evidence from Eleanor Vance's journals, particularly the ominous presence of R.P. and his apparent interest in her research, propelled Emily into a more active phase of investigation. She knew that understanding the identity and motives of R.P. was paramount to unraveling the mystery surrounding Eleanor's disappearance and the secrets hidden within Wildwood Manor. And the most logical starting point seemed to be Rex Putnam. Emily decided to collaborate with Dan Miller, the local handyman whose growing knowledge of Wildwood's history and residents had proven invaluable. Dan's pragmatic approach and his willingness to help, combined with Emily's determination and her access to Eleanor's journals, created a formidable partnership. Dan, Emily began one evening, spreading out the journals and newspaper clippings on the dusty dining room table. "I think we need to focus on Rex Putnam. He's the most likely candidate for RP. The timing, his family's history with the Vances, and the way Eleanor wrote about R.P., it all points to him." Dan nodded slowly, his brow furrowed in thought. "I agree. Rex has always been a powerful figure in this town. And Pharmacorp, they're a big player, even outside of Wildwood." Emily explained her theory about R.P.'s potential interest in Eleanor's research, particularly the golden blend formula. She shared the disturbing entries from the journals, highlighting Eleanor's growing fear and the veiled threats she perceived. If Eleanor was close to a medical breakthrough, Emily said, her voice filled with a mixture of excitement and apprehension, and if Pharmacorp knew about it, it would make sense for them to try to acquire it. It could be worth billions. Dan's eyes widened. Billions. For some old herbal remedy. It's more than just an old herbal remedy, Dan, Emily countered, her voice firm. Eleanor's research suggests it could be a cure for a debilitating illness, maybe even for other related conditions. That kind of potential is incredibly valuable in the pharmaceutical industry. They decided to begin by gathering more information about Pharmacorp and Rex Putnam. Emily and Dan spent hours at the local library and the Historical Society, meticulously combing through old newspapers, business records, and online databases. Their initial research confirmed that Pharmacorp was indeed a major pharmaceutical company with a significant presence in the region. Founded by Rex Putnam's father, the company had initially focused on traditional chemical manufacturing but had expanded rapidly under Rex's leadership, venturing into the lucrative field of drug development and production. They found numerous articles praising Rex Putnam's business acumen, his philanthropic endeavors, and his influence in the local community. He was portrayed as a visionary leader, a driving force behind Wildwood's economic growth and a generous benefactor to various local charities. However, amidst the glowing portrayals, Emily and Dan also uncovered some less flattering information. There were reports of aggressive business tactics, of questionable acquisitions of smaller pharmaceutical companies, and of a pattern of suppressing negative research findings related to some of Pharmacorp's products. One article, buried deep within the archives of an obscure business journal, detailed a lawsuit filed against Pharmacorp by a group of patients who claimed that a particular drug had caused them serious and long-term health problems. The lawsuit was eventually settled out of court, with Pharmacorp admitting no wrongdoing but agreeing to a substantial payout to the plaintiffs. This information painted a more complex picture of Rex Putnam and Pharmacorp. While he was undoubtedly a successful businessman and a respected figure in the community, there were also hints of a darker side, a willingness to prioritize profit over people, and a history of suppressing information that could damage the company's bottom line. As they delved deeper, Emily and Dan discovered that Pharmacorp had recently invested heavily in research and development related to neurological disorders and chronic fatigue syndromes. This was particularly intriguing, given Eleanor Vance's focus on Wildwood syndrome, an illness that shared some similarities with these conditions. "This is too much of a coincidence," Emily said, her voice filled with suspicion. Pharmacorp is actively researching illnesses similar to Wildwood syndrome, and Rex Putnam has a personal connection to Eleanor Vance and her research. "It's like all the pieces of the puzzle are starting to fit together." Dan nodded in agreement. "It's definitely worth looking into further. But we need more than just circumstantial evidence. We need to find something concrete, something that directly links Rex Putnam or Pharmacorp to Eleanor's disappearance or her research." Emily and Dan decided to expand their investigation beyond the local resources. They started exploring online databases and archives, searching for any information related to Pharmacorp's research activities, its patents, and its interactions with the scientific community. They also began reaching out to individuals who might have known Eleanor Vance or worked with Pharmacorp in the past. This proved to be a challenging task, as many of the people they sought were elderly or had moved away from Wildwood. However, one lead emerged that held particular promise. B.A. Evelyn Reed, the librarian, remembered that Eleanor Vance had corresponded with a renowned botanist named Dr. Alastair Finch, who specialized in the medicinal properties of local flora. Dr. Finch had retired several years ago and now lived in a remote cabin in the mountains north of Wildwood. "He's a bit of a recluse," B.A. Evelyn said, "but he was a brilliant man. Eleanor respected his work immensely. If anyone knows about her research, it would be him." Emily and Dan exchanged a hopeful glance. Dr. Finch could be the key to unlocking the secrets of Eleanor Vance's golden blend and understanding its potential value to Pharmacorp. He might also possess valuable insights into Eleanor's relationship with Rex Putnam and the circumstances surrounding her disappearance. The journey to Dr. Finch's cabin would be arduous, but Emily and Dan knew they had to pursue this lead. The whispers of the past were growing louder, the shadows of suspicion were deepening, and they were determined to uncover the truth, no matter where it led them. The investigation into Pharmacorp and the Putnam legacy had begun, and Emily and Dan were prepared to follow its trail wherever it might lead. Emily's exploration of Wildwood Manor continued to yield unexpected discoveries, each new find deepening the mystery surrounding Eleanor Vance and her life within the old house. One afternoon, while carefully sorting through a dusty collection of family heirlooms stored in a large, ornate chest in the attic, she stumbled upon a box filled with old photographs. The photographs, mostly black and white or sepia-toned, offered a fascinating glimpse into the Vance family's past. There were formal portraits of stern-faced ancestors, candid snapshots of lively gatherings, and idyllic scenes of family life in a bygone era. Emily spent hours poring over these images, trying to piece together the history of the house and its former inhabitants. Among the portraits and landscapes, one particular photograph caught her eye and sent a jolt of unease through her. It was a group shot taken at what appeared to be a charity event, judging by the festive decorations and the elegantly dressed attendees. Eleanor Vance, looking younger and more vibrant than in the later photographs Emily had seen, stood near the center of the group, her expression warm and welcoming. But it wasn't Eleanor who drew Emily's attention. It was the young man standing beside her daughter, Sarah. It was Rex Putnam. He was much younger in the photograph, barely out of his teens, with a charming smile and a confident air. His arm was casually draped around Sarah's shoulders, and his gaze was fixed on her with an undeniable tenderness. Sarah, radiant in a flowing dress, returned his gaze with an equally affectionate smile. The connection between them was palpable, a youthful fondness that transcended mere acquaintance. Emily stared at the photograph, a mix of fascination and discomfort swirling within her. The image contradicted the growing sense of animosity between the Vance and Putnam families that she had gleaned from Eleanor's journals and the town's historical records. It suggested a deeper, more personal relationship between Rex Putnam and the Vances, a relationship that had seemingly soured over time. The photograph raised a multitude of questions. How close had Rex and Sarah been? Were they simply childhood friends, or was there something more romantic between them? What had happened to transform their youthful affection into the suspicion and resentment hinted at in Eleanor's writings? A wave of unease washed over Emily as she considered the implications of this discovery. If Rex Putnam had once been close to the Vance family, his potential involvement in Eleanor's life and her research became even more complex and potentially more sinister. The photograph also cast a new light on Eleanor's final, fragmented entry in her journal, the one that mentioned Sarah's sacrifice. What sacrifice had Sarah made? Could it be related to her relationship with Rex Putnam? Could her illness and eventual death have somehow fueled the growing tension between the two families? Emily felt a growing sense that the secrets held within Wildwood Manor were not just historical curiosities, they were deeply personal, rooted in the intertwined lives and relationships of the Vance and Putnam families. The past was not just whispering, it was reaching out, its tendrils wrapping around the present, pulling Emily deeper into its embrace. She decided to share her discovery with Dan Miller. His pragmatic perspective and his knowledge of the town and its residents would be invaluable in interpreting the significance of the photograph. Dan, Emily said, showing him the faded image, look at this. Rex Putnam and Sarah Vance. They look close. Dan took the photograph, his brow furrowed in concentration. He studied it for a moment, then nodded slowly. Yeah, I remember hearing stories about them. They were childhood sweethearts, or so the gossip went. Everyone thought they'd get married someday. What happened? Emily asked. Dan sighed. Sarah got sick. The Wildwood syndrome, they called it. It was a terrible illness. No one could figure out what caused it or how to cure it. Eleanor tried everything, but Sarah didn't make it. And that drove a wedge between the families. Emily prompted. Dan shrugged. Maybe. Or maybe it was something else. The Vances and the Putnams were always different. The Vances were old money, into tradition, and preserving the past. The Putnams were all about progress and expansion. Their values clashed. He paused, his gaze drifting towards the photograph. But seeing this, it makes you wonder, doesn't it? If things had been different, if Sarah had lived, maybe things would have turned out differently for everyone. Emily and Dan discussed the implications of the photograph late into the evening, their conversation punctuated by the ing of the old house and the rustling of wind through the broken windows. They agreed that the photograph added a crucial piece to the puzzle, highlighting the complex and intertwined history of the Vance and Putnam families. The discovery also reinforced Emily's suspicion that Rex Putnam's interest in Eleanor Vance's research might stem from something more than just corporate greed. It raised the possibility of a personal connection, a lingering obsession with the past, or perhaps even a sense of guilt or responsibility related to Sarah's illness. As Emily prepared for bed that night, the photograph lay on her bedside table, its faded image casting a long shadow across her thoughts. The faces of Rex and Sarah, young and full of hope, seemed to gaze back at her, their silent story echoing through the empty rooms of Wildwood Manor. The whispers in the walls were growing louder, more insistent, urging Emily to delve deeper, to uncover the truth behind the secrets hidden within the house and the intertwined destinies of the Vance and Putnam families. And Emily, drawn in by the mystery and fueled by a growing sense of purpose, was determined to listen. The pervasive chill in Wildwood Manor seemed to intensify as Emily ventured into the basement. The air down there was damp and heavy, carrying a faint earthy smell that mingled with the musty odor of decay. The flickering light from her battery-powered lantern cast dancing shadows on the rough stone walls, creating an atmosphere of unsettling mystery. The basement was largely untouched, a cavernous space filled with forgotten storage trunks, rusted tools, and the remnants of a long-abandoned coal furnace. Emily had mostly avoided it, focusing her efforts on the more habitable areas of the house. But the growing urgency of her investigation, fueled by Eleanor Vance's journals and the unsettling photograph, compelled her to explore its depths. She carefully navigated the uneven stone floor, her footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence. As she moved deeper into the basement, towards the rear of the house, she noticed something unusual. A section of the stone wall appeared to be slightly different, constructed with smoother, more carefully placed stones. And in the center of this section, almost hidden in the shadows, was a heavy wooden door. It was an old door, its dark wood weathered and scarred, its surface devoid of any ornamentation. A heavy iron lock secured it, its mechanism rusted and seemingly frozen in time. Emily tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The door was firmly sealed, as if deliberately concealed from the rest of the house. A surge of adrenaline coursed through Emily. A locked door, hidden in the depths of the basement, suggested something significant, something Eleanor Vance wanted to keep private. The thought of what might lie behind it sent a shiver of excitement and apprehension down her spine. She knew she couldn't open it alone. The lock was too sturdy, and the door itself looked too heavy to force. She decided to wait for Dan Miller, who was due to arrive the next day to continue his repairs. That night, Emily barely slept. Her mind raced with possibilities. Could this be the hidden lab Eleanor had mentioned in her journal? Could it contain the golden blend formula she was so desperate to protect? Or could it hold even more disturbing secrets, remnants of experiments gone wrong, or evidence of Eleanor's final days? The following morning, Emily eagerly awaited Dan's arrival. When he finally arrived, she led him straight to the basement, her voice filled with a mixture of excitement and urgency. "Dan, you won't believe what I found," she said, her lantern illuminating the heavy wooden door. "A secret room. I think it might be Eleanor Vance's laboratory." Dan's eyebrows shot up. He examined the door and the lock with a professional eye. "Well, that's definitely not something you want to force. We'll need to work carefully if we want to get it open without damaging anything." He retrieved a set of tools from his truck, including a crowbar, a hammer, and a selection of lockpicks. He first attempted to pick the lock, but the mechanism proved too stubborn. The years of rust and disuse had fused the internal components together. After several unsuccessful attempts, Dan decided to try a more forceful approach. He carefully positioned the crowbar along the edge of the door and, with a few well-placed blows of the hammer, managed to pry it open. The wood groaned in protest, and a cloud of dust billowed out from the other side. Emily and Dan exchanged a nervous glance before cautiously stepping through the doorway. The air inside the room was thick with the scent of dried herbs, chemicals, and the faint metallic tang of old equipment. It was a self-contained world, a snapshot of Eleanor Vance's scientific life preserved in time. A single shaft of sunlight, piercing through a crack in the boarded-up window, illuminated the room, revealing its contents in stark detail. Glass beakers and vials of various shapes and sizes lined dusty shelves. Mortars and pestles, their surfaces stained with the residue of countless experiments, lay scattered on a long workbench. Strange contraptions of glass and metal, their purpose no longer immediately apparent, stood in the corners. The room was clearly a laboratory, a place where Eleanor Vance had conducted her research in isolation. It was a testament to her dedication, her ingenuity, and her relentless pursuit of knowledge. Emily and Dan moved slowly through the room, their eyes wide with wonder and a sense of reverence. It was as if they had stumbled upon a sacred space, a sanctuary of scientific inquiry. Among the clutter, they found more notebooks, their pages filled with Eleanor's meticulous notes and observations. These notebooks appeared to be more focused on her experiments, detailing the specific procedures she used, the measurements she recorded, and the conclusions she drew from her findings. There were also samples of dried herbs, carefully labeled and stored in glass jars. Emily recognized some of the plants from Eleanor's sketches, plants that grew wild around Wildwood Manor. The sheer variety and quantity of the specimens underscored the breadth of Eleanor's research and her deep understanding of the local flora. But the most significant discovery was a large, leather-bound book lying open on the workbench. This book was different from the others. Its pages were filled with a complex series of chemical formulas, meticulously handwritten in Eleanor's elegant script. It was clear that this was a record of her most important work, the culmination of her years of research. As Emily carefully examined the formulas, a particular one caught her eye. It was accompanied by detailed notes on its preparation and potential applications. The ingredients listed were all local plants, many of which Emily had seen growing in the overgrown garden surrounding Wildwood Manor. The notes suggested that this formula, perhaps the golden blend mentioned in Eleanor's journal, was not just a simple herbal remedy. Eleanor had written about its potential to not only alleviate the symptoms of Wildwood syndrome but also to target its underlying cause, potentially offering a cure for the debilitating illness. The implications were staggering. Could Eleanor Vance have stumbled upon a medical breakthrough, a natural remedy with far-reaching potential? And if so, what had happened to it? Why had it never been brought to light? A sense of awe and responsibility washed over Emily as she stood in the hidden laboratory, surrounded by the remnants of Eleanor Vance's scientific legacy. She felt a profound connection to the woman who had dedicated her life to unlocking the secrets of the natural world, a shared sense of purpose in uncovering the truth hidden within the walls of Wildwood Manor. The whispers in the basement were no longer just echoes of the past, they were a call to action, a challenge to continue Eleanor's work and bring her discoveries to light. And Emily, the unlikely inheritor of Eleanor's secrets, was determined to answer that call. The discovery of Eleanor Vance's hidden laboratory in the basement of Wildwood Manor was a watershed moment in Emily's investigation. It confirmed the depth of Eleanor's research and hinted at the potential significance of her findings. But the most shocking revelation came from a closer examination of the laboratory notebooks, particularly the one detailing her clinical trials. As Emily and Dan carefully documented the contents of the lab, they spent hours poring over Eleanor's meticulous records. The notebooks revealed the rigorous methodology she employed, the careful observation of symptoms, and the painstaking documentation of her experiments with various herbal preparations. The early entries detailed Eleanor's initial optimism as she observed positive responses to her treatments. Some participants reported a reduction in fatigue, an improvement in cognitive function, and a lessening of physical pain. Eleanor's notes reflected her excitement and her belief that she was on the verge of a breakthrough. However, as they delved deeper into the notebooks, Emily and Dan uncovered a more disturbing truth. Eleanor's clinical trials were not without their risks. The entries revealed a pattern of adverse reactions, unexpected side effects, and instances where participants' conditions worsened despite her interventions. One recurring theme was Eleanor's experimentation with different dosages and combinations of herbal extracts. She seemed to be constantly adjusting her formulas, trying to find the optimal balance between therapeutic benefit and potential harm. Her notes were filled with expressions of concern, self-doubt, and a growing sense of desperation. Then, they found the entries that chilled them to the bone. Eleanor had used her own daughter, Sarah, as a subject in her clinical trials. The realization hit Emily like a physical blow. The tender entries about Sarah in Eleanor's personal journal, filled with a mother's boundless love and desperate hope, were now juxtaposed against the cold, clinical observations in the laboratory notebook. Eleanor had meticulously documented Sarah's symptoms, her decline, and her responses to the experimental treatments. The entries were detached and scientific, yet the undercurrent of a mother's anguish was palpable. Initially, Sarah had shown some improvement. Eleanor recorded a slight increase in her energy levels, a brief period of cognitive clarity, and a fleeting return of her former vitality. These moments of hope were described with a mixture of scientific objectivity and a mother's fervent prayer. But the improvement was short-lived. Sarah's condition deteriorated, the Wildwood syndrome tightening its grip. The notebooks detailed the agonizing progression of her illness, the relentless fatigue, the debilitating pain, and the gradual fading of her spirit. Eleanor's notes became increasingly desperate, filled with self-recrimination and a growing sense of futility. She questioned her methods, her knowledge, her ability to save her own child. The entries were a harrowing account of a mother's love in the face of insurmountable odds. The most heartbreaking entries were the final ones, chronicling Sarah's last days. Eleanor's scientific observations gave way to raw, unfiltered grief. She wrote of her helplessness, her despair, and her overwhelming sense of loss. "My Sarah, my bright, beautiful Sarah, is gone," one entry read, the handwriting shaky and almost illegible. "I have failed her. I have failed as a mother, as a scientist. The darkness has claimed her, and I could not stop it." The notebooks revealed that Eleanor had pushed the boundaries of her research, experimenting with increasingly potent and untested remedies in a desperate attempt to save Sarah. The entries hinted at a growing recklessness, a willingness to take greater risks as her daughter's condition worsened. It was a chilling revelation, casting a dark shadow over Eleanor Vance's legacy. Her dedication to her research, her unwavering commitment to finding a cure, were now inextricably linked with the tragic fate of her own daughter. Emily and Dan sat in stunned silence, the weight of Eleanor's anguish pressing down on them. The laboratory, once a place of scientific exploration, now felt like a shrine to a mother's grief and a daughter's sacrifice. "This changes everything," Emily said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "It complicates everything." Dan nodded slowly. "It does. Eleanor wasn't just a researcher, she was a mother fighting for her child's life. And she was willing to do anything, even if it meant risking her own daughter's health." The discovery of Sarah's involvement in Eleanor's clinical trials raised a host of ethical questions. Was Eleanor's research driven by scientific curiosity or by a desperate personal need? Did she cross ethical boundaries in her pursuit of a cure? And how did Sarah feel about being a subject in her mother's experiments? The notebooks offered no answers to these questions. They simply presented the cold, hard facts of Eleanor's research and the tragic outcome of Sarah's illness. Emily felt a profound sense of sadness and empathy for Eleanor. She understood the depth of a mother's love, the willingness to sacrifice everything for a child's well-being. But she also recognized the potential for ethical lapses, the dangers of desperation clouding judgment. The discovery also deepened the mystery surrounding Eleanor's disappearance. Could her guilt over Sarah's death have driven her to abandon her research and flee Wildwood Manor? Or could her experiments have uncovered something dangerous, something that someone was willing to kill for? The whispers in the laboratory were no longer just echoes of scientific discovery, they were whispers of grief, guilt, and a mother's tragic sacrifice. And Emily knew that understanding the full story of Eleanor Vance and her research was crucial to unlocking the secrets hidden within the walls of Wildwood Manor. The weight of the revelations from Eleanor Vance's clinical trial notebook hung heavy in the air of Wildwood Manor. The discovery of Sarah's involvement in her mother's experiments and the tragic outcome of her illness cast a somber shadow over Emily's investigation. The house, once a repository of intriguing secrets, now felt imbued with a deep sense of loss and ethical complexity. Emily and Dan spent the following days in a state of quiet contemplation, carefully documenting the laboratory and reviewing Eleanor's notes. They discussed the implications of her research, the potential for both healing and harm, and the ethical dilemmas she faced as a scientist and a mother. The more they delved into Eleanor's work, the more they realized the immense responsibility they had undertaken. They were not just uncovering a historical mystery, they were handling potentially powerful knowledge that could have significant consequences if it fell into the wrong hands. One evening, as Emily was preparing dinner for Lily and Noah, a simple meal of canned soup and sandwiches, the old landline phone in the kitchen rang. It was an antiquated rotary phone, miraculously still connected to the outside world, its ring jarringly loud in the otherwise quiet house. Emily hesitated before answering. An unsettling feeling, A premonition of something amiss prickled at the back of her neck. She picked up the receiver, her hand trembling slightly. "Hello," she said, her voice barely audible. There was a moment of silence on the other end, a faint rustling sound, as if someone was breathing heavily. Then, a low, breathy voice, distorted and almost whispered, filled her ear. "Leave it alone," the voice rasped, the words barely intelligible. "The past is best left buried. You don't know what you're getting yourself into." Emily's heart began to pound. "Who is this?" she managed to ask, her voice shaking. The voice ignored her question. "Stop digging into Eleanor Vance's affairs. Stop asking questions about Rex Putnam. You're playing a dangerous game. And if you continue, those you care about will suffer." The threat hung in the air, cold and menacing. Emily's mind raced, trying to make sense of the cryptic warning. Who was this person? How did they know about her investigation? And what did they mean by threatening her children? "What do you want?" Emily pleaded, her voice rising in panic. "What do you know?" But the voice offered no further explanation. The line went dead with a sharp click, leaving Emily standing alone in the kitchen, the receiver clutched tightly in her hand. A wave of fear washed over her, chilling her to the bone. The anonymous phone call was a stark reminder of the potential danger she was facing. The secrets of Wildwood Manor were not just historical curiosities, they were something that someone was willing to threaten her and her children to protect. Lily and Noah, sensing their mother's distress, clung to her, their faces etched with worry. Emily hugged them tightly, her protective instincts surging to the forefront. She would do anything to keep them safe, even if it meant abandoning her quest for the truth. But beneath the fear, a flicker of anger began to smolder. She couldn't let herself be intimidated. She couldn't allow someone to silence Eleanor Vance's story and suppress her research. The threat, instead of deterring her, fueled her determination to uncover the truth, to expose whoever was trying to keep the past buried. She knew she needed to be careful. She couldn't afford to take any risks, especially where her children's safety was concerned. But she also knew she couldn't back down. The whispers in the walls of Wildwood Manor were no longer just echoes of the past, they were a cry for justice, and Emily was determined to answer that call. She decided to confide in Dan Miller about the phone call. His pragmatic approach and his knowledge of the town and its residents would be invaluable in assessing the threat and determining the best course of action. When Dan arrived the next day, Emily recounted the chilling conversation, her voice trembling slightly as she repeated the whispered threats. Dan listened intently, his expression grave. "That's not good," he said finally, his brow furrowed. "That sounds like someone is serious about wanting you to stop. And involving your kids, that's crossing a line. What do you think I should do?" Emily asked, her voice filled with uncertainty. "Should I call the police? Should I just drop the whole thing and leave?" Dan considered her questions carefully. "The police might not be able to do much without more information," he said. "And leaving, that might not solve anything. Whoever made that call knows where you are. They know about Wildwood Manor. They might not just let you go." He paused, his gaze thoughtful. "I think we need to be cautious, but we can't let them scare us off. We've come too far to give up now. We need to find out who's behind this and what they're trying to hide." Dan suggested taking precautions to ensure Emily and the children's safety. He installed stronger locks on the doors and windows, advised her to avoid being alone in the house at night, and offered to stay with them until they could figure out the extent of the threat. He also suggested expanding their investigation beyond the local resources. "We need to find out more about Pharmacorp and Rex Putnam," he said. "Their business dealings, their connections, their history. The more we know, the better we can understand what we're up against." Emily agreed. The anonymous phone call had confirmed her suspicions. She had stumbled upon something dangerous, something worth protecting at any cost. And she was determined to uncover the truth, no matter the risks. The whispers in the walls of Wildwood Manor had turned into a chilling warning, a threat that hung heavy in the air. But they had also ignited a fire within Emily, a fierce determination to protect her children and to bring Eleanor Vance's story to light. The investigation had become a personal battle, a fight against an unseen enemy, and Emily was ready to face whatever darkness lay ahead. The chilling anonymous phone call served as a catalyst, propelling Emily and Dan into a more focused and urgent phase of their investigation. The threat against Emily and her children underscored the potential danger surrounding Eleanor Vance's research and solidified their resolve to uncover the truth, no matter the risks. Their primary focus shifted to Rex Putnam and Pharmacorp. The evidence they had already gathered, the historical animosity between the Vance and Putnam families, the potential environmental impact of Putnam Industries, and the mysterious circumstances surrounding Eleanor's disappearance, pointed towards a possible connection. But they needed more concrete proof, something that directly linked Rex Putnam to Eleanor's work and her fate. Emily and Dan dedicated hours to meticulously reviewing the documents they had collected, Eleanor's journals and notebooks, the old newspaper clippings, the historical society records, and the online databases they had accessed. They searched for any mention of Rex Putnam in Eleanor's writings, any indication of his knowledge of her research, and any hint of his potential involvement in her disappearance. The journals, particularly the later entries, became their primary source of information. Eleanor's growing fear of RP and her desperate attempts to protect her golden blend formula painted a disturbing picture. Her veiled allusions to his power and influence, combined with her increasing paranoia, suggested that RP was not just a rival but a formidable adversary. As they re-examined the clinical trial notebook, they found further evidence that Rex Putnam had indeed been aware of Eleanor's research. In several entries, Eleanor referred to meetings and discussions with an individual she identified only as RP regarding the progress of her experiments and the potential applications of her herbal preparations. While the notebooks didn't explicitly state Rex Putnam's full name, the context and the surrounding details strongly suggested that RP was indeed him. Eleanor's descriptions of R.P.'s demeanor, his questions about her findings, and his apparent interest in the golden blend formula aligned with the image of a powerful and ambitious businessman. The discovery of the photograph showing a young Rex Putnam alongside Sarah Vance added another layer of complexity to the situation. The youthful affection between them, juxtaposed against the later animosity hinted at in Eleanor's writings, raised unsettling questions. Could Rex Putnam's interest in Eleanor's research have stemmed from a more personal connection, a lingering obsession with the past, or perhaps even a sense of guilt or responsibility related to Sarah's illness? The possibility that his motives were not purely financial added a disturbing dimension to their investigation. Emily and Dan also focused their attention on Pharmacorp, searching for any evidence of their potential interest in Wildwood syndrome or related ailments. They explored the company's research and development activities, its patents, and its publications in scientific journals. They discovered that Pharmacorp had indeed invested heavily in research related to neurological disorders and chronic fatigue syndromes, illnesses that shared some similarities with the symptoms described in Eleanor Vance's journals. This finding further strengthened their suspicion that Pharmacorp might have been interested in acquiring Eleanor's golden blend formula, believing it held the key to a lucrative medical breakthrough. However, finding concrete evidence directly linking Rex Putnam or Pharmacorp to Eleanor's disappearance proved to be a formidable challenge. The records were carefully guarded, and any potentially incriminating information seemed to have been meticulously concealed. Despite the lack of definitive proof, Emily and Dan's suspicions continued to grow. The circumstantial evidence, combined with Eleanor's own fears and the threatening phone call, painted a compelling picture of a cover-up, a conspiracy to silence Eleanor Vance and suppress her research. "I think they killed her," Emily said one evening, her voice filled with a mixture of anger and sadness. "I think Rex Putnam and Pharmacorp are responsible for Eleanor's disappearance. They wanted her formula, and they were willing to do anything to get it. Dan nodded slowly, his expression grim. It's a strong possibility. But we need to be careful. We can't make accusations without proof. We're dealing with powerful people, people who aren't afraid to use their influence to protect themselves. They discussed their next steps, weighing the risks and the potential rewards. They knew they were treading on dangerous ground, but they were also driven by a sense of justice, a determination to uncover the truth and bring Eleanor Vance's story to light. The anonymous phone call had served as a stark reminder of the potential consequences of their investigation. But it had also solidified their resolve. They couldn't back down now. They had come too far, and the whispers in the walls of Wildwood Manor were too insistent to ignore. Emily and Dan decided to continue their investigation, but with increased caution. They agreed to avoid taking unnecessary risks and to prioritize their safety. They also decided to expand their search for evidence beyond the local resources, reaching out to contacts outside of Wildwood who might have information about Pharmacorp's activities or Rex Putnam's past. The web of suspicion was growing tighter, the shadows of the past were deepening, and Emily and Dan were determined to follow the trail wherever it might lead, even if it meant confronting the darkness that lurked beneath the surface of Wildwood. Emily and Dan's investigation into Pharmacorp took a disturbing turn as they delved deeper into the pharmaceutical giant's business practices. The initial research had revealed a pattern of aggressive acquisitions and a willingness to suppress negative research findings. But now, they uncovered something even more sinister, evidence that Pharmacorp was actively developing a drug eerily similar to Eleanor Vance's Golden Blend formula, but with a crucial difference: its exorbitant price tag. Their breakthrough came from a combination of sources. Dan, with his local connections, learned through hushed conversations at the town diner that Pharmacorp had been quietly recruiting local residents for clinical trials. These trials, shrouded in secrecy, focused on a new drug designed to treat neurological disorders and chronic fatigue syndromes, the same types of illnesses that shared similarities with Wildwood syndrome. Emily, meanwhile, continued her online research, meticulously analyzing Pharmacorp's patents and scientific publications. She discovered a patent application for a drug with a complex chemical composition, a composition that bore a striking resemblance to the ingredients listed in Eleanor Vance's formulas. The key components were extracts from several of the local plants Eleanor had studied, plants that grew wild around Wildwood Manor. The more they investigated, the clearer the picture became. Pharmacorp, under Rex Putnam's leadership, was indeed developing a drug based on Eleanor Vance's research. But instead of making it affordable and accessible to those who desperately needed it, they were preparing to market it at an astronomical price, ensuring massive profits for the company and its shareholders. The implications of this discovery were staggering. Eleanor Vance had dedicated her life to finding a cure for a debilitating illness that plagued her community, a cure she intended to share freely with those in need. Now, Pharmacorp, driven by greed, was poised to exploit her research for their own financial gain, leaving countless patients to suffer because they couldn't afford the treatment. The realization of Rex Putnam's potential motives for acquiring Eleanor's research sent a wave of revulsion through Emily. The possibility that he had not only stolen her work but was also planning to profit from the suffering of others was a betrayal of everything Eleanor Vance had stood for. "This is sickening," Emily said, her voice filled with anger and disgust. "He's going to make a fortune off of Eleanor's discoveries, while people are still suffering from Wildwood syndrome. It's not just unethical, it's downright evil." Dan nodded grimly. "It's the pharmaceutical industry, Emily. They're not exactly known for their altruism. But this is a whole new level of greed." They discussed their options, their determination to expose Pharmacorp's actions growing with each new piece of evidence. They knew they were up against a powerful corporation with vast resources and a willingness to protect its interests at any cost. But they also knew they couldn't remain silent. "We have to do something," Emily said, her eyes blazing with resolve. "We can't let them get away with this. Eleanor Vance's research belongs to the people, not to some profit-hungry corporation. Dan agreed. We need to find a way to expose Pharmacorp's actions, to bring this information to light. But we need to be careful. They're not going to take this lying down. They considered contacting the authorities, but they knew that Pharmacorp's influence might extend even to the local law enforcement. They also considered going to the media, but they worried about the potential for Pharmacorp to manipulate the narrative or discredit their claims. We need a way to present our evidence in a way that's undeniable, that's irrefutable, Emily said, her mind racing. We need to find a way to reach a wide audience and expose the truth without putting ourselves in too much danger. They decided to focus on gathering more evidence, strengthening their case, and identifying potential allies who could help them bring Pharmacorp's actions to light. They continued to explore Pharmacorp's patents and research publications, searching for more details about the drug's composition and its clinical trials. They also reached out to individuals who had participated in Pharmacorp's local clinical trials, hoping to gather first-hand accounts of the drug's effects and any potential side effects. This proved to be a challenging task, as many participants were hesitant to speak out, fearing retribution from Pharmacorp. However, they eventually found a few brave individuals who were willing to share their experiences. These accounts confirmed Emily and Dan's suspicions. The drug, while showing some promise in alleviating certain symptoms, came with a hefty price tag, both literally and figuratively. Participants described experiencing a range of side effects, some of which were quite severe. They also expressed concerns about the drug's affordability, knowing that it would be out of reach for most patients without extensive insurance coverage. These first-hand accounts, combined with the evidence from Eleanor Vance's research and Pharmacorp's own documents, solidified Emily and Dan's resolve. They were determined to expose Pharmacorp's greed and to bring Eleanor Vance's research to the attention of the public, ensuring that its potential benefits would be accessible to all who needed them. The whispers in the walls of Wildwood Manor had become a roar, a demand for justice that Emily and Dan could no longer ignore. They were ready to confront the darkness that lurked beneath the surface of Wildwood, to challenge the power of a ruthless corporation, and to fight for the truth, no matter the cost. The weight of their discoveries about Pharmacorp and Rex Putnam pressed heavily on Emily and Dan. The realization that a potentially life-saving cure was being exploited for profit, while those in need were left to suffer, ignited a fire within them. They knew they had to act, but they also understood the risks involved. They were up against a powerful corporation with vast resources and a reputation for ruthlessness. After careful consideration, they decided to reach out to Sarah Jenkins, a local journalist known for her integrity and her commitment to uncovering the truth. Sarah worked for the Wildwood Gazette, the town's small but respected newspaper. Emily had followed Sarah's work for years and admired her unwavering dedication to investigative reporting. "Sarah Jenkins is our best shot," Emily said to Dan, her voice firm. "She's not afraid to take on tough stories, and she has a reputation for accuracy. If anyone can help us expose Pharmacorp, it's her." Dan agreed. "But we need to be careful. We can't just walk into her office and tell her everything. We need to present our evidence in a clear and compelling way, and we need to protect ourselves in case Pharmacorp tries to retaliate." They meticulously organized their findings, compiling Eleanor Vance's journals and notebooks, the photographs, the historical records, the patent applications, and the first-hand accounts from Pharmacorp's clinical trial participants. They created a timeline of events, highlighting the key connections between Eleanor Vance, Rex Putnam, and Pharmacorp's research. Emily drafted a concise but impactful summary of their investigation, outlining their suspicions about Rex Putnam's motives, Pharmacorp's potential involvement in Eleanor Vance's disappearance, and the company's plans to profit from her research. With their evidence prepared and their strategy in place, Emily and Dan nervously approached the Wildwood Gazette office. The building was a quaint, two-story structure in the heart of town, its facade adorned with large windows showcasing the latest edition of the newspaper. Sarah Jenkins, a woman in her late 30s with sharp eyes and an air of quiet determination, greeted them in the reception area. Emily introduced herself and Dan, explaining that they had a story of significant local and potentially national importance. Sarah, intrigued by their seriousness and the weight in their voices, led them to a small, cluttered conference room. "All right," she said, her gaze steady. "Tell me what you've got." Emily began by sharing Eleanor Vance's story, her voice filled with passion as she recounted the researcher's dedication, her struggles, and her tragic fate. She presented the journals and notebooks, allowing Sarah to examine Eleanor's meticulous notes and sketches. Sarah was immediately captivated by Eleanor's elegant handwriting, her scientific rigor, and the poignant details of her personal life. She recognized the significance of Eleanor's research and the potential for a medical breakthrough. Emily then shifted her focus to Rex Putnam and Pharmacorp, outlining their suspicions about his motives and the company's potential interest in Eleanor Vance's work. She presented the photograph showing a young Rex Putnam alongside Sarah Vance, highlighting their close relationship and the possibility of a personal connection to Eleanor's research. Dan chimed in, sharing his knowledge of the town's history, the animosity between the Vance and Putnam families, and the rumors surrounding Eleanor's disappearance. He emphasized the potential for a cover-up, a conspiracy to suppress the truth. Emily then unveiled the most damning evidence, the patent application for Pharmacorp's new drug, a drug that bore a striking resemblance to Eleanor Vance's Golden Blend formula. She explained Pharmacorp's plans to market the drug at an exorbitant price, effectively denying access to those who desperately needed it. Sarah listened intently, her sharp eyes scanning the documents, her fingers tracing the faded ink on Eleanor's journals. She asked probing questions, challenging their assumptions and demanding concrete proof. Emily and Dan answered her questions patiently, providing detailed explanations and presenting their evidence in a clear and compelling manner. They emphasized the ethical implications of Pharmacorp's actions and the potential for a major public health scandal. As Sarah reviewed the evidence, her initial skepticism gradually gave way to a growing sense of urgency. She recognized the importance of the story, the potential for it to expose corporate greed and to bring justice to Eleanor Vance. "This is incredible," Sarah said finally, her voice filled with excitement and determination. "This could be huge. Not just for Wildwood, but for everyone." She agreed to investigate the story, promising to follow every lead and to uncover the truth, no matter where it led. She warned Emily and Dan about the potential risks involved, emphasizing the need for caution and discretion. "Pharmacorp is a powerful company," Sarah said. "They won't hesitate to protect their interests. We need to be careful. We need to make sure we have all our facts straight, and we need to be prepared for a fight." Emily and Dan left the Wildwood Gazette office with a mixture of hope and apprehension. They had taken the first step in exposing the truth, but they knew the journey ahead would be fraught with danger. The whispers in the walls of Wildwood Manor had found a voice, and Sarah Jenkins was ready to amplify that voice to the world. The investigation had become a race against time, a battle against a powerful adversary, and the stakes were higher than ever before. Sarah Jenkins, true to her reputation, launched into the investigation with unwavering determination. She meticulously verified the authenticity of Eleanor Vance's journals and notebooks, consulting with botanists and historians to confirm the accuracy of her research and the historical context of her life. She meticulously reviewed the patent applications, consulting with legal experts to understand the implications of Pharmacorp's claims. She also began interviewing individuals connected to Pharmacorp, both current and former employees, seeking to uncover any internal knowledge of the company's research activities and its potential interest in Eleanor Vance's work. This proved to be a challenging task. Many employees were hesitant to speak, fearing repercussions from the company. Some clammed up entirely, while others offered vague, non-committal responses. However, Sarah's persistence paid off. A former research scientist, disillusioned with Pharmacorp's ethical practices, agreed to speak anonymously. He confirmed that the company had indeed been actively researching a drug similar to Eleanor Vance's formula and that Rex Putnam had shown a keen interest in the project. He also hinted at a culture of secrecy and intimidation within Pharmacorp, where dissenting voices were silenced and inconvenient truths were suppressed. As Sarah's investigation progressed, the Wildwood Gazette began publishing a series of articles, carefully and strategically revealing the evidence she had gathered. The initial articles focused on Eleanor Vance's life and work, painting a compelling portrait of a brilliant and dedicated researcher who had dedicated her life to helping her community. The articles sparked widespread interest in Wildwood and beyond. Readers were captivated by Eleanor's story, her scientific discoveries, and her unwavering commitment to finding a cure for Wildwood syndrome. The Wildwood Gazette's circulation soared, and Sarah Jenkins became a local hero. But the attention also attracted the notice of Pharmacorp and Rex Putnam. They initially dismissed the articles as sensationalized local news, but as the investigation deepened and the evidence mounted, they realized the potential threat to their reputation and their profits. Rex Putnam, accustomed to controlling the narrative and wielding his considerable influence, reacted swiftly and decisively. He unleashed the full force of Pharmacorp's resources to discredit Sarah Jenkins, suppress the truth, and protect his company's interests. The first line of defense was legal. Pharmacorp's high-powered lawyers sent a barrage of cease and desist letters to the Wildwood Gazette, threatening to sue the newspaper for libel and defamation. They claimed that Sarah Jenkins's reporting was biased, inaccurate, and damaging to Pharmacorp's reputation. The lawyers also targeted Emily and Dan, sending them intimidating letters demanding that they cease their harassment of Pharmacorp and Rex Putnam. They accused them of trespassing on Pharmacorp property, of spreading false accusations, and of conspiring to damage the company's business. The legal threats were accompanied by a campaign of misinformation and character assassination. Pharmacorp's public relations team launched a counter-offensive, disseminating press releases and online articles that portrayed Sarah Jenkins as an irresponsible journalist seeking to sensationalize a local story for personal gain. They also attempted to discredit Eleanor Vance, portraying her as an eccentric and unreliable researcher whose work was based on outdated and unscientific methods. They dredged up old rumors and gossip about her reclusiveness and her unconventional lifestyle, painting her as an unstable and unreliable source. The most insidious tactic was the spreading of rumors and innuendo about Emily and Dan. They were portrayed as opportunists, driven by a desire for fame and fortune, who were exploiting Eleanor Vance's story for their own selfish purposes. Their motives were questioned, their credibility was attacked, and their personal lives were scrutinized and distorted. The intensity of Pharmacorp's counteroffensive was overwhelming. Emily, Dan, and Sarah found themselves under siege, bombarded by legal threats, media attacks, and online harassment. The pressure was immense, and the strain began to take its toll. Emily, already struggling to balance her investigation with her responsibilities as a single mother, felt increasingly vulnerable and isolated. The threats against her and her children weighed heavily on her, and she began to question her decision to get involved in the investigation. Dan, though more resilient, was also affected by the relentless attacks. He felt a growing sense of responsibility for Emily's safety and a burning anger at Pharmacorp's tactics. He was determined to protect Emily and to see justice served, no matter the cost. Sarah Jenkins, though accustomed to the pressures of investigative reporting, found herself facing an unprecedented level of hostility. Pharmacorp's attempts to discredit her were personal and vicious, targeting her integrity and her professionalism. She felt the weight of the story, the responsibility to uncover the truth, and the fear of the potential consequences of her actions. Despite the immense pressure, Emily, Dan, and Sarah refused to back down. They were united by their determination to expose Pharmacorp's actions and to bring Eleanor Vance's story to light. They knew they were fighting against a powerful adversary, but they also knew they had the truth on their side. The whispers in the walls of Wildwood Manor had become a battle cry, a call to arms against corporate greed and injustice. and Emily, Dan, and Sarah were ready to answer that call, to face the Goliath of Pharmacorp, and to fight for what they believed was right. The relentless counter-offensive launched by Pharmacorp and Rex Putnam threatened to overwhelm Emily, Dan, and Sarah. The legal threats, the media attacks, and the insidious campaign of disinformation created a climate of fear and uncertainty. The pressure was immense, and the strain began to test their resolve. Just when their hope seemed to be waning, a crucial piece of information surfaced, offering a glimmer of light in the encroaching darkness. B.A. Evelyn Reed, the town librarian, whose vast knowledge of Wildwood's history had been invaluable to their investigation, recalled a significant detail about Eleanor Vance. One evening, as Emily and Dan sought refuge in the quiet sanctuary of the library, seeking solace and information amidst the chaos, B.A. Evelyn approached them with a thoughtful expression. "I've been thinking about Eleanor," she said, her voice soft but firm. "About her work, her fears, and something just came back to me." Emily and Dan leaned in, their hearts filled with a renewed sense of anticipation. B.A. Evelyn's memory had proven to be a reliable source of information, and they trusted her instincts implicitly. Eleanor was a cautious woman, B.A. Evelyn continued. She was meticulous in her research, but she was also aware of the potential for things to go wrong. She often spoke of the importance of safeguarding her work, of ensuring that it wouldn't be lost or misused. She paused, her gaze drifting towards the window, as if peering into the recesses of her memory. And then it hit me. I remember her mentioning a colleague, a fellow scientist she trusted implicitly. Someone she considered a true ally in her pursuit of knowledge. Emily and Dan exchanged excited glances. This could be the breakthrough they needed. A trusted colleague of Eleanor Vance, someone who might possess a copy of her research, a safeguard against potential threats. It was a lifeline in their struggle against Pharmacorp. Who was this colleague? Emily asked, her voice trembling with anticipation. B.A. Evelyn smiled, a hint of triumph in her eyes. His name was Dr. Alastair Finch. He was a renowned botanist, a specialist in the medicinal properties of local flora. He and Eleanor shared a deep passion for their work and a mutual respect for each other's expertise. Where is he now? Dan asked, his voice eager. B.A. Evelyn's smile faded slightly. He retired several years ago. Moved to a remote cabin in the mountains north of Wildwood. He's become quite reclusive, I hear. Doesn't see many people. A reclusive scientist living in the mountains, the image was both intriguing and daunting. Reaching him would be a challenge, but the potential reward was too significant to ignore. Do you know how to find him? Emily asked. B.A. Evelyn nodded. I have an old address. I'm not sure if it's still current, but it's worth a try. He always preferred the solitude of the mountains. Said it allowed him to think clearly, to connect with nature. She retrieved a small, worn address book from her desk and carefully copied down the address onto a piece of paper. The address was vague, a winding road leading into a densely forested region. Finding Dr. Finch would be like searching for a needle in a haystack. Despite the challenges, Emily and Dan felt a surge of renewed hope. Dr. Finch could be the key to unlocking the secrets of Eleanor Vance's golden blend formula, to understanding the full extent of her research, and to finding the evidence they needed to expose Pharmacorp's wrongdoing. They shared the news with Sarah Jenkins, who immediately recognized the significance of this new lead. She agreed to accompany them on the journey to the mountains, her journalistic instincts sensing a crucial turning point in the investigation. This could be it, Sarah said, her eyes gleaming with determination. If Dr. Finch has a copy of Eleanor's research, it could be the smoking gun we need. It could prove that Pharmacorp is trying to steal her work, and it could reveal the true potential of her discoveries. The journey to Dr. Finch's cabin was arduous. The winding road climbed steadily into the mountains, the landscape growing increasingly rugged and remote. The air grew thinner and colder, and the silence of the wilderness replaced the noise and chaos of the town. They drove for hours, their hope dwindling with each passing mile. The address B.A. Evelyn had provided was outdated, leading them to a long-abandoned logging camp. They asked for directions at a small general store in a remote village, but the locals had never heard of Dr. Alastair Finch. Just as their spirits began to flag, they stumbled upon a narrow, overgrown path leading deeper into the forest. A weathered sign, barely legible, hinted at a trail leading to a herbalist's cabin. With renewed determination, they followed the path, their car struggling to navigate the rough terrain. The forest grew denser, the trees towering over them like silent sentinels. The silence was profound, broken only by the rustling of leaves and the chirping of unseen birds. After what seemed like an eternity, they emerged into a small clearing. In the center stood a simple wooden cabin, its roof covered in moss, its windows glowing with a warm, inviting light. A thin plume of smoke curled from the chimney, a sign of life in the heart of the wilderness. They had found Dr. Alastair Finch. The encounter with the reclusive scientist would be a pivotal moment in their investigation. He held the potential to unlock the secrets of Eleanor Vance's research and to provide the evidence they needed to confront Pharmacorp. But they also knew that they were venturing into the unknown, into a world where the past and the present intertwined, and where the truth might be hidden amidst the towering trees and the whispering wind. The sight of Dr. Alastair Finch's cabin, nestled amidst the towering pines and bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun, filled Emily, Dan, and Sarah with a mixture of relief and trepidation. They had endured a grueling journey, traversing winding mountain roads and navigating treacherous trails, their determination fueled by the hope that the reclusive scientist held the key to unlocking Eleanor Vance's secrets. As they approached the cabin, a sense of profound tranquility settled over them. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine needles and damp earth. The only sounds were the gentle rustling of leaves and the distant murmur of a mountain stream. It was a world away from the noise and chaos of Wildwood, a sanctuary of peace and solitude. Dan, ever the pragmatist, knocked firmly on the cabin door. The sound echoed through the stillness, and they waited, their breath held in anticipation. After a moment, the door creaked open, revealing a figure silhouetted against the warm light within. Dr. Alastair Finch was a tall, lean man, his face etched with the wisdom of years spent in contemplation and communion with nature. His silver hair was long and flowing, his eyes sharp and intelligent, despite the wrinkles that framed them. He wore simple, homespun clothes, his hands gnarled and calloused from years of working with plants. He regarded them with a cautious curiosity, his gaze sweeping over their faces. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice deep and resonant, with a hint of a Scottish brogue. Emily stepped forward, her voice filled with respect. "Dr. Finch, we've come a long way to find you. We're investigating the work of Eleanor Vance, a researcher from Wildwood. B.A. Evelyn Reed at the library mentioned that you were a friend and colleague of hers." A flicker of recognition passed across Dr. Finch's face. "Eleanor, yes, I remember her well. A brilliant woman, a true visionary. What brings you to my door after all these years?" Emily explained their investigation, carefully recounting Eleanor Vance's story, her research into Wildwood syndrome, and their suspicions about Pharmacorp's potential involvement in her disappearance. She shared the journals, the notebooks, and the photograph, presenting the evidence they had gathered with meticulous detail. Dr. Finch listened intently, his gaze unwavering. He examined the documents with a keen eye, his fingers tracing the familiar script of Eleanor Vance. A range of emotions flickered across his face, sadness, nostalgia, and a hint of anger. When Emily finished, he remained silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the fire crackling in the hearth. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken thoughts and memories. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and filled with a quiet intensity. "Eleanor, she was a force of nature. Her passion for understanding the healing power of plants was unparalleled. We shared a deep bond, a mutual respect for the wonders of the natural world." He shared his own memories of Eleanor, painting a vivid picture of a woman driven by a relentless curiosity and a profound compassion for her community. He spoke of their collaborative work, their shared discoveries, and their unwavering belief in the potential of nature to heal. Eleanor was on the verge of a breakthrough, Dr. Finch said, his eyes gleaming with a hint of pride. She had identified a unique combination of local plants that showed remarkable promise in treating wildwood syndrome. It was a revolutionary discovery, a potential cure for a debilitating illness. He paused, his expression clouding over. But there were those who sought to exploit her work, to profit from her genius. Eleanor knew the danger she was in. She feared that her research would fall into the wrong hands. He then revealed the reason for their arduous journey. That's why she entrusted me with a copy of her complete research, her life's work. She wanted to ensure that her discoveries would be protected, that they would be available to help those in need, regardless of the greed and ambition of others. Emily, Dan, and Sarah exchanged stunned glances. This was the moment they had been working towards, the evidence they desperately needed to expose Pharmacorp and bring Eleanor Vance's story to light. Dr. Finch rose from his chair and walked to a heavy wooden chest in the corner of the cabin. He opened it carefully, revealing a collection of meticulously organized notebooks and journals. He retrieved a large, leather-bound volume, its pages filled with Eleanor Vance's elegant script and detailed illustrations. "This is it," he said, his voice trembling slightly. Eleanor's complete research, including the Golden Blend formula, her notes on its preparation, and the results of her clinical trials. He handed the volume to Emily, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and responsibility. "This is a precious gift, a legacy of healing. It is your responsibility to protect it, to ensure that Eleanor's work is not in vain." Emily accepted the volume with reverence, her heart overflowing with gratitude and a renewed sense of purpose. The weight of Eleanor Vance's legacy rested in her hands, and she knew she would do everything in her power to honor it. The encounter with Dr. Alastair Finch was a turning point in their investigation. They had found the evidence they needed, the key to unlocking the secrets of Eleanor Vance's research and exposing the truth about Pharmacorp. But they also knew that their journey was far from over. The darkness they were fighting against was powerful and ruthless, and the battle ahead would be fraught with danger. The return journey from Dr. Alastair Finch's cabin was a blur of adrenaline and anticipation. Emily clutched the leather-bound volume containing Eleanor Vance's research like a precious artifact, her mind racing with the implications of their discovery. Dan, his usual stoic demeanor replaced by a quiet excitement, drove with a focused intensity, eager to bring the truth to light. Sarah Jenkins, her journalistic instincts buzzing, scribbled notes furiously, already envisioning the explosive story that lay before her. The evidence they now possessed was irrefutable. Eleanor Vance's complete research, authenticated by a respected scientist, provided undeniable proof of her groundbreaking discoveries and Pharmacorp's attempts to exploit them. The journals and notebooks painted a vivid picture of Eleanor's life, her struggles, and her unwavering dedication to healing. The photograph and the historical records revealed the complex and potentially sinister relationship between the Vance and Putnam families. With the weight of the truth in their possession, they knew they had to act swiftly and decisively. They returned to Wildwood, a renewed sense of purpose fueling their determination to confront the darkness that had shrouded the town for so long. Sarah Jenkins, with the support of the Wildwood Gazette's editor, prepared to unleash a journalistic bombshell. She meticulously crafted a series of articles, weaving together the various threads of their investigation into a compelling narrative that would expose Pharmacorp's actions and bring Eleanor Vance's story to the forefront. The articles were carefully structured to build suspense and maximize impact. The initial pieces focused on Eleanor Vance's life and work, portraying her as a brilliant and compassionate researcher whose discoveries had been unjustly suppressed. Sarah Jenkins's writing was evocative and empathetic, drawing readers into Eleanor's world and making them care about her fate. The Wildwood Gazette's circulation skyrocketed as readers eagerly devoured each installment. Local residents, who had long whispered about the mysteries surrounding Wildwood Manor and Eleanor Vance's disappearance, were captivated by the revelations. The articles sparked heated debates and discussions, forcing the town to confront its hidden history. As the series progressed, Sarah Jenkins gradually introduced the evidence linking Pharmacorp to Eleanor Vance's research. She meticulously documented the patent applications, highlighting the striking similarities between Pharmacorp's drug and Eleanor's Golden Blend formula. She presented the accounts of the clinical trial participants, exposing the drug's exorbitant cost and its potential side effects. The allegations against Pharmacorp were damning, and the Wildwood Gazette's reporting was meticulous and credible. Sarah Jenkins's reputation for accuracy and integrity lent weight to the accusations, making it difficult for Pharmacorp to dismiss the story as mere sensationalism. The tension in Wildwood reached a fever pitch as the final, most explosive article was prepared for publication. This article would reveal the full extent of Pharmacorp's potential wrongdoing, including the possibility of their involvement in Eleanor Vance's disappearance. It would present the evidence gathered from Dr. Alastair Finch, including Eleanor's complete research and the Golden Blend formula. Emily, Dan, and Sarah braced themselves for the inevitable backlash. They knew that Pharmacorp and Rex Putnam would not take these accusations lightly. They prepared for a fierce counteroffensive, a desperate attempt to discredit them and suppress the truth. The day the final article was published, a palpable sense of anticipation hung over Wildwood. The Wildwood Gazette sold out within hours, with residents lining up outside the newspaper office to secure a copy. The article spread like wildfire, its shocking revelations reverberating through the town and beyond. The impact was immediate and profound. The community was outraged by Pharmacorp's alleged actions, their anger fueled by a sense of betrayal and a deep-seated respect for Eleanor Vance. Protests erupted outside Pharmacorp's headquarters, demanding answers and accountability. The media, initially hesitant to cover the story, was forced to take notice. The Wildwood Gazette's meticulous reporting and the overwhelming public response made it impossible to ignore the potential scandal. National news outlets descended upon Wildwood, eager to uncover the truth behind the small town's explosive revelations. Pharmacorp, caught off guard by the intensity of the backlash, scrambled to contain the damage. They issued a series of press releases, denying all allegations and accusing the Wildwood Gazette of spreading false and defamatory information. They threatened legal action against the newspaper and anyone who dared to repeat the accusations. Rex Putnam, initially silent, finally emerged to address the public. He held a press conference, his demeanor calm and confident, his words carefully chosen. He portrayed himself as a victim of a smear campaign, a successful businessman unfairly targeted by a small-town newspaper and a group of disgruntled individuals. He dismissed Eleanor Vance's research as irrelevant and outdated, claiming that Pharmacorp's drug was a result of their own innovative research. He vehemently denied any involvement in Eleanor Vance's disappearance, portraying the allegations as baseless and absurd. However, his carefully crafted facade began to crumble under the intense scrutiny of the media and the public. Sarah Jenkins, relentless in her pursuit of the truth, challenged his claims with irrefutable evidence, presenting Eleanor Vance's research and the patent applications side by side. The public, increasingly skeptical of Pharmacorp's denials, demanded a thorough and independent investigation. Law enforcement agencies, initially hesitant to get involved, were forced to take action, launching a formal inquiry into Pharmacorp's activities and the circumstances surrounding Eleanor Vance's disappearance. The whispers in the walls of Wildwood Manor had finally found a voice, a powerful voice that resonated throughout the town and beyond. The truth was out, and the battle for justice had only just begun. The Wildwood Gazette's explosive revelations, amplified by the national media's attention, ignited a firestorm of public outrage that swept across the nation. The carefully constructed image of Pharmacorp as a benevolent pharmaceutical giant crumbled under the weight of the evidence, exposing a ruthless corporation driven by greed and willing to exploit human suffering for profit. The most potent voices in the chorus of condemnation were those of the individuals and families directly affected by Wildwood syndrome. Their stories, once confined to the shadows of the small town, were now thrust into the spotlight, their pain and desperation echoing across the airwaves and filling the pages of newspapers. These were the people Eleanor Vance had dedicated her life to helping, the victims of a mysterious and debilitating illness that had robbed them of their vitality, their cognitive clarity, and their hope for a normal life. They had endured years of suffering, often dismissed by the medical establishment, their symptoms labeled as psychosomatic or all in their head. Now, Eleanor Vance's research offered them a glimmer of hope, a potential cure that Pharmacorp was poised to withhold from them, all for the sake of maximizing profits. The injustice of it all was too much to bear. Support groups for individuals with chronic fatigue syndromes and neurological disorders, many of whom shared similar symptoms with Wildwood syndrome, joined the chorus of condemnation. They recognized the potential of Eleanor Vance's research to benefit their own communities and rallied against Pharmacorp's blatant disregard for human life. Protests erupted outside Pharmacorp's headquarters in various cities, drawing thousands of angry demonstrators. They carried signs with slogans like "Justice for Eleanor Vance," "Cure over Profit," and "Pharmacorp Kills," their chants echoing through the streets, demanding accountability and reform. The pressure on law enforcement agencies intensified. Local authorities, initially hesitant to investigate a powerful corporation like Pharmacorp, were forced to take action under the weight of public pressure and media scrutiny. The FBI and other federal agencies launched their own investigations, focusing on allegations of corporate misconduct, scientific fraud, and potential criminal negligence. The investigations delved into Pharmacorp's research and development activities, scrutinizing their clinical trials, their patent applications, and their internal communications. Investigators interviewed current and former employees, seeking to uncover any evidence of wrongdoing or unethical practices. The scrutiny extended to Rex Putnam himself. His personal and professional life came under intense public and legal scrutiny. His past business dealings, his philanthropic endeavors, and his relationship with the Vance family were all examined under a microscope. Sarah Jenkins, tireless in her pursuit of the truth, continued to publish articles in the Wildwood Gazette, providing ongoing updates on the investigations and amplifying the voices of the victims. She became a national figure, a symbol of journalistic integrity and unwavering commitment to justice. Emily and Dan, though initially hesitant to step into the spotlight, found themselves thrust into the center of the controversy. They became reluctant heroes, their faces appearing on television screens and their story recounted in newspapers across the country. They used their platform to advocate for greater transparency and ethical conduct in the pharmaceutical industry, calling for stricter regulations and increased accountability. They also established a foundation in Eleanor Vance's name, dedicated to supporting research into Wildwood syndrome and ensuring that any future treatments would be accessible to all who needed them. The revelations about Pharmacorp had a devastating impact on the company's stock price, which plummeted as investors fled in droves. Public trust in the pharmaceutical giant eroded, and calls for boycotts of their products grew louder. Rex Putnam, once a celebrated figure, became a pariah, his reputation tarnished beyond repair. He faced mounting legal challenges, both criminal and civil, and his future hung in the balance. The truth had been unleashed, and the consequences were far-reaching. The whispers in the walls of Wildwood Manor had become a roar, a powerful force that threatened to topple a corporate giant and transform the landscape of the pharmaceutical industry. Emily, Dan, and Sarah, unlikely allies bound together by a shared commitment to justice, stood at the forefront of the movement, their determination unwavering, their voices amplified by the fury of the afflicted. The battle was far from over, but the tide had turned. The Goliath of Pharmacorp was wounded, and the forces of truth and justice were closing in. The public outcry against Pharmacorp and Rex Putnam reached a fever pitch, fueled by Sarah Jenkins's relentless reporting and the heart-wrenching testimonies of those affected by Wildwood syndrome. The mounting pressure from the media, the public, and the ongoing investigations forced Rex Putnam to make a strategic decision: a press conference. He hoped to regain control of the narrative, to address the allegations head-on, and to restore his and Pharmacorp's tarnished image. He envisioned a carefully orchestrated event, a display of his power and confidence that would quell the rising tide of anger and suspicion. However, he underestimated the resolve of Emily, Dan, and Sarah. They saw the press conference as an opportunity, a chance to confront Rex Putnam directly, to challenge his denials, and to present their evidence to a wider audience. They knew they had to be present, to ensure that the truth was not buried under a carefully constructed smokescreen of lies and deceit. The press conference was held in a grand ballroom at a prestigious hotel in a nearby city. The room was packed with reporters, television crews, and curious onlookers. The atmosphere was charged with tension, a palpable sense of anticipation hanging in the air. Rex Putnam arrived with an entourage of lawyers and public relations specialists. He exuded an air of calculated composure, his tailored suit and polished demeanor projecting an image of power and authority. He took his place at the podium, his gaze sweeping across the room, his expression a carefully crafted mask of confidence. He began with a carefully rehearsed statement, reiterating Pharmacorp's denials of any wrongdoing and accusing the Wildwood Gazette and its sources of spreading false and defamatory information. He portrayed himself as a victim of a smear campaign, a successful businessman unfairly targeted by those seeking to destroy his company and his reputation. He then opened the floor for questions, expecting the reporters to be deferential, to accept his carefully crafted narrative. But he was met with a barrage of aggressive inquiries, fueled by Sarah Jenkins's relentless reporting and the public's growing skepticism. Reporters grilled him about the patent applications, demanding an explanation for the striking similarities between Pharmacorp's drug and Eleanor Vance's Golden Blend formula. They pressed him about the accounts of the clinical trial participants, questioning the drug's affordability and its potential side effects. The most intense scrutiny focused on Eleanor Vance's disappearance. Reporters demanded to know about his relationship with the Vance family, his knowledge of Eleanor's research, and his potential motives for acquiring it. Rex Putnam's carefully constructed composure began to crack under the pressure. It was during this tense exchange that Emily, Dan, and Sarah made their move. They had secured seats near the front of the room, their presence a silent challenge to Rex Putnam's carefully crafted narrative. As a reporter shouted a particularly pointed question about Eleanor Vance's fate, Emily stood up, her voice clear and unwavering. "Mr. Putnam," she said, her gaze locking with his, "I have something I'd like to share with everyone." A hush fell over the room. All eyes turned to Emily, her presence a stark reminder of the human cost of Pharmacorp's actions. Rex Putnam's face flushed with anger. "You have no right to be here," he snarled, his carefully crafted facade slipping away. "This is a private event." "The truth is not private," Emily countered, her voice firm. "It belongs to everyone." She then pulled out Eleanor Vance's journal, its pages filled with the researcher's elegant script and poignant reflections. She opened it to the final, fragmented entry, the one that hinted at Eleanor's growing fear and her desperate attempts to protect her research. "I want to read you Eleanor Vance's last words," Emily said, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. "Words that reveal the true cost of your ambition, Mr. Putnam, the true extent of your greed." She began to read, her voice filling the room, her words echoing the pain, the fear, and the unwavering determination of the woman whose life had been so tragically intertwined with Rex Putnam's. The silence in the room was profound, broken only by Emily's voice and the occasional gasp from the reporters. The power of Eleanor Vance's words, her raw honesty and her unwavering commitment to justice, captivated the audience. As Emily read, Rex Putnam's composure crumbled entirely. His face contorted with rage, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and desperation. He tried to interrupt her, to silence her, but Emily's voice remained strong and unwavering. When she finished reading, a collective sigh swept through the room. The power of Eleanor Vance's words had pierced through Rex Putnam's carefully constructed defenses, exposing the truth that he had so desperately tried to hide. Emily then looked directly at Rex Putnam, her eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and defiance. "You may have tried to silence her, Mr. Putnam," she said, her voice ringing with conviction, "but you failed. Her words, her research, her legacy, they will live on. And we will not rest until justice is served." The room erupted in a cacophony of questions and shouts. The reporters, sensing a major turning point in the story, clamored for answers, their microphones thrusting towards Rex Putnam, their cameras capturing his every reaction. Rex Putnam, his carefully constructed world collapsing around him, could only stammer and deny, his words hollow and unconvincing. The truth had been unleashed, and the consequences would be devastating. The confrontation at the press conference marked a pivotal moment in the battle against Pharmacorp and Rex Putnam. The whispers of the past had become a roar, a powerful force that threatened to topple a corporate giant and transform the landscape of justice. And Emily, Dan, and Sarah, the unlikely heroes of this story, stood at the forefront of the movement, their determination unwavering, their voices amplified by the power of truth and compassion. The aftermath of the press conference was a whirlwind of legal maneuvering, public outcry, and intense media scrutiny. Emily's powerful reading of Eleanor Vance's words, combined with Sarah Jenkins's relentless reporting, had shattered Rex Putnam's carefully constructed defenses, exposing the truth about Pharmacorp's greed and the potential for their involvement in Eleanor's disappearance. The authorities, spurred by the overwhelming public demand for justice and the mounting evidence against Pharmacorp, launched a full-scale investigation. The FBI, the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, and other federal agencies joined forces to scrutinize Pharmacorp's financial records, research and development activities, and internal communications. The investigation uncovered a web of corporate misconduct, scientific fraud, and unethical practices that stretched far beyond the initial allegations concerning Eleanor Vance's research. It revealed a pattern of suppressing negative research findings, manipulating clinical trial data, and engaging in aggressive marketing tactics that prioritized profit over patient safety. The evidence against Rex Putnam himself grew increasingly damning. Investigators discovered internal memos and emails that directly implicated him in the decision to acquire Eleanor Vance's research and to develop a high-priced drug based on her findings. They also uncovered evidence of his attempts to silence critics and discredit Sarah Jenkins and Emily. The legal proceedings against Pharmacorp and Rex Putnam were complex and protracted, involving a series of criminal and civil trials. The trials attracted national attention, becoming a battleground for the soul of the pharmaceutical industry and a test of the legal system's ability to hold powerful corporations and individuals accountable. The prosecution presented a compelling case, meticulously documenting Pharmacorp's unethical practices and Rex Putnam's role in orchestrating them. They called upon former employees, scientific experts, and victims of Pharmacorp's drugs to testify, their accounts painting a disturbing picture of corporate greed and disregard for human life. The defense, armed with an army of high-powered lawyers, attempted to discredit the prosecution's witnesses, to obfuscate the evidence, and to portray Pharmacorp and Rex Putnam as victims of a politically motivated witch hunt. They argued that Pharmacorp's actions were standard business practices and that Rex Putnam was a visionary leader unfairly targeted by sensationalist journalism. However, the weight of the evidence and the power of the human stories presented by the prosecution proved too much to overcome. The jury, swayed by the overwhelming evidence and the moral outrage of the public, returned guilty verdicts on multiple counts. Rex Putnam and several other key executives of Pharmacorp were convicted of fraud, conspiracy, and other criminal charges. They faced lengthy prison sentences and hefty fines. Pharmacorp itself was found liable for its unethical practices and ordered to pay billions of dollars in damages to the victims of its drugs and to the families of those who had suffered as a result of their negligence. The legal fallout extended beyond the courtroom. Pharmacorp faced a complete overhaul of its corporate structure and management. The company was subjected to strict government oversight, and its operations were restructured to prioritize patient safety and ethical conduct. The trials served as a wake-up call for the pharmaceutical industry, forcing a long-overdue reckoning with its ethical responsibilities. Congress passed new legislation aimed at increasing transparency and accountability in drug development, pricing, and marketing. The Food and Drug Administration, FDA, strengthened its regulatory oversight, implementing stricter guidelines for clinical trials and drug approvals. The victory in the courtroom was not just a legal triumph, it was a moral victory, a triumph of truth over lies, of justice over greed. It proved that even the most powerful corporations and individuals could be held accountable for their actions, and that the voices of the marginalized and the oppressed could ultimately prevail. Emily, Dan, and Sarah, the unlikely heroes of this saga, were hailed as champions of justice. They became symbols of courage and resilience, their story inspiring people across the nation to stand up against injustice and to demand accountability from those in power. The whispers in the walls of Wildwood Manor had finally been heard, their echoes reverberating through the halls of justice and transforming the landscape of the pharmaceutical industry. The battle had been long and arduous, but the forces of truth and justice had ultimately prevailed. However, the legal victory was only the beginning of the healing process. The scars left by Pharmacorp's actions and the mystery surrounding Eleanor Vance's disappearance remained. The next chapter of the story would focus on rebuilding the community, honoring Eleanor Vance's legacy, and ensuring that her research would be used to heal and not to harm. The legal battle against Pharmacorp, while ultimately successful in bringing Rex Putnam and his cronies to justice, unearthed a far more insidious and widespread pattern of corporate malfeasance. As investigators delved deeper into Pharmacorp's practices, they uncovered a dark secret, a chilling example of the company's willingness to sacrifice patient well-being for financial gain. It was revealed that Pharmacorp had knowingly concealed serious side effects associated with one of their blockbuster drugs, a medication widely prescribed for chronic pain. The drug, while effective in alleviating pain for some patients, had been shown in internal studies to exacerbate Wildwood syndrome in a significant subset of users. The connection was chillingly ironic. A drug intended to provide relief was, in fact, worsening the very condition that Eleanor Vance had dedicated her life to understanding and treating. And Pharmacorp, driven by the desire to maintain its profits, had deliberately withheld this information from doctors and patients. The evidence was damning. Internal memos and emails detailed discussions among Pharmacorp executives about the drug's potential to exacerbate Wildwood syndrome. They debated the financial implications of disclosing this information, weighing the potential for lawsuits and decreased sales against the ethical obligation to inform patients of the risks. The decision was clear: profit outweighed patient safety. Pharmacorp chose to suppress the evidence, continuing to market the drug aggressively, even as patients suffered. The consequences were devastating. Individuals already struggling with Wildwood syndrome experienced a dramatic worsening of their symptoms, their lives thrown into further turmoil. The revelation of Pharmacorp's cover-up ignited a fresh wave of public outrage. The initial anger directed at the company for its exploitation of Eleanor Vance's research was compounded by a profound sense of betrayal. The public, already disillusioned with the pharmaceutical industry, felt their worst fears confirmed. The legal proceedings against Pharmacorp expanded to include charges related to the concealment of the drug's side effects. The company faced massive lawsuits from affected patients and their families, their claims supported by compelling evidence of corporate negligence and malice. The trials were emotionally charged, filled with heartbreaking testimonies from individuals whose lives had been irrevocably damaged by Pharmacorp's greed. Their stories of suffering, of pain exacerbated by a drug that was supposed to provide relief, painted a harrowing picture of corporate callousness. The prosecution argued that Pharmacorp's actions were not merely a case of corporate negligence but a calculated act of violence against the health and well-being of vulnerable patients. They presented evidence of a corporate culture that prioritized profits above all else, a culture that fostered a disregard for ethical considerations. The defense, as before, attempted to portray Pharmacorp as a victim of unfair accusations, arguing that the side effects were rare and unpredictable. They downplayed the severity of the symptoms and attempted to shift blame to the patients themselves, claiming they had failed to follow doctors' instructions. But the evidence and the testimonies were too compelling to ignore. The jury, deeply moved by the suffering of the victims and outraged by Pharmacorp's blatant disregard for human life, returned a verdict of guilty on all counts. Pharmacorp faced unprecedented financial penalties, crippling the company and forcing it to undergo a complete restructuring. Its assets were seized, its research and development programs were dismantled, and its future was plunged into uncertainty. The fallout from the scandal extended far beyond the courtroom. The public's trust in the pharmaceutical industry reached an all-time low, sparking calls for radical reform. Lawmakers introduced legislation aimed at increasing transparency in clinical trials, strengthening regulatory oversight, and holding pharmaceutical companies accountable for their actions. The revelations about Pharmacorp's cover-up served as a stark reminder of the potential for corporate greed to inflict immense harm. It underscored the urgent need for a more ethical and compassionate approach to healthcare, one that prioritizes patient well-being above all else. For Emily, Dan, and Sarah, the discovery of Pharmacorp's additional wrongdoing solidified their resolve to fight for justice. They used their platform to advocate for systemic change, to ensure that the pharmaceutical industry would never again be allowed to exploit human suffering for profit. The whispers in the walls of Wildwood Manor had become a powerful force for change, their echoes resonating through the halls of justice and inspiring a movement for ethical health care. The battle against Pharmacorp had exposed the darkness lurking beneath the surface of corporate greed, but it had also ignited a spark of hope, a belief in the power of truth and compassion to prevail. The downfall of Pharmacorp and the exposure of their unethical practices marked a turning point in the story, a victory for truth and justice. But for Emily, Dan, and the residents of Wildwood, it was also a moment of profound reflection and a call to action. The battle against corporate greed had been won, but the true work of healing and rebuilding was just beginning. The scientific community, initially skeptical of Eleanor Vance's unconventional methods and her reliance on herbal remedies, was forced to re-evaluate her research in light of the evidence uncovered during the Pharmacorp trials. The meticulous documentation in her journals and notebooks, authenticated by Dr. Alastair Finch, could no longer be dismissed as the work of an eccentric recluse. Leading scientists and medical researchers began to acknowledge the potential of Eleanor Vance's discoveries, recognizing the validity of her observations and the promise of her golden blend formula. They expressed a mixture of awe and regret, acknowledging the decades of neglect and the potential lives that could have been saved if her research had been given proper attention. The Wildwood Gazette, under Sarah Jenkins's continued leadership, played a crucial role in disseminating Eleanor Vance's findings to the wider scientific community. They published detailed articles summarizing her research, highlighting its potential applications, and advocating for further investigation. Emily and Dan, inspired by Eleanor Vance's dedication and fueled by a deep sense of responsibility, decided to take a proactive role in ensuring that her research would be used to benefit those in need. They envisioned a future where the Golden Blend formula, or a derivative thereof, would be available to everyone suffering from Wildwood syndrome and related ailments, regardless of their socioeconomic status. To achieve this ambitious goal, they established a non-profit organization dedicated to Eleanor Vance's legacy. The Eleanor Vance Foundation was born, its mission to promote research into Wildwood syndrome, to develop affordable treatments based on Eleanor's discoveries, and to provide support and resources to patients and their families. The establishment of the foundation was a collaborative effort, bringing together the residents of Wildwood, scientists, healthcare professionals, and philanthropists from across the country. The community, deeply affected by the suffering caused by Wildwood syndrome and inspired by Eleanor Vance's unwavering dedication, rallied behind the project, offering their time, expertise, and financial support. Dan, with his practical skills and deep connection to the land, oversaw the creation of a research facility at Wildwood Manor. The old house, once a symbol of decay and mystery, was transformed into a beacon of hope and healing. The laboratory in the basement, where Eleanor Vance had conducted her groundbreaking experiments, was meticulously restored and modernized, equipped with state-of-the-art equipment. Emily, with her passion for justice and her ability to connect with people on a personal level, became the Foundation's public face, advocating for its mission and raising awareness about Wildwood syndrome. She shared Eleanor Vance's story with audiences across the country, inspiring them with the tale of a dedicated researcher who had sacrificed everything to find a cure for a debilitating illness. Sarah Jenkins, continuing her work at the Wildwood Gazette, became a tireless advocate for the Eleanor Vance Foundation, using her journalistic platform to promote its activities and to hold the pharmaceutical industry accountable for ensuring equitable access to health care. The Foundation's research efforts focused on replicating and refining Eleanor Vance's Golden Blend formula, utilizing modern scientific techniques to understand its mechanisms of action and to identify potential improvements. They conducted rigorous clinical trials, adhering to the highest ethical standards and prioritizing patient safety. The results of the trials were overwhelmingly positive. The refined formula proved to be highly effective in alleviating the symptoms of Wildwood syndrome, significantly improving the quality of life for patients. It also showed promise in treating other related neurological disorders and chronic fatigue syndromes. The Eleanor Vance Foundation faced numerous challenges along the way. They encountered resistance from the established pharmaceutical industry, which saw their efforts as a threat to their profits. They struggled to secure funding, relying heavily on the generosity of individual donors and small grants. But the Foundation's unwavering commitment to its mission, combined with the power of Eleanor Vance's research and the support of the community, allowed them to overcome these obstacles. They persevered, driven by a deep sense of purpose and a belief in the inherent right to health care. Eventually, the Eleanor Vance Foundation achieved its ultimate goal, the development and distribution of an affordable and accessible treatment for Wildwood syndrome. The Golden Blend formula, or a derivative thereof, became widely available, bringing hope and healing to countless individuals who had long suffered in silence. The legacy of Eleanor Vance, the researcher who had dedicated her life to unlocking the secrets of the natural world, was finally realized. Her discoveries, once buried in the dusty confines of Wildwood Manor, were now transforming lives and shaping the future of medicine. The whispers in the walls of Wildwood Manor, once filled with mystery and fear, now carried a message of hope and healing. They were a testament to the power of truth, the resilience of the human spirit, and the enduring legacy of a woman who had dared to challenge the darkness and bring light to the world. The transformation of Wildwood Manor mirrored the transformation of Emily's own life. What had begun as a desperate gamble, a last-ditch effort to secure a future for her children, had evolved into a profound journey of self-discovery, a battle against injustice, and ultimately, a testament to the power of hope and healing. The dilapidated mansion, once a symbol of decay and shrouded in whispers of the past, became a vibrant hub of community activity, a physical embodiment of Eleanor Vance's legacy and the enduring spirit of Wildwood. Emily, with Dan's unwavering support and the enthusiastic participation of the townspeople, poured her heart and soul into its restoration. The initial repairs, driven by necessity and limited resources, had focused on making the house habitable, clearing out the debris, and securing the structure. But as the Eleanor Vance Foundation gained momentum and the community rallied behind its mission, the renovation took on a new dimension, a vision of creating a space that would serve as a center for healing, education, and community support. Dan, with his expertise in carpentry and his deep understanding of the house's architecture, oversaw the meticulous restoration of the grand rooms. The warped floorboards were replaced with gleaming hardwood, the peeling wallpaper was stripped away to reveal the original plasterwork, and the broken windows were replaced with panes of clear glass that allowed the sunlight to flood in. The dusty library, where Emily had first discovered Eleanor Vance's journals, was transformed into a resource center, housing a collection of books on herbal medicine, natural therapies, and local history. The laboratory in the basement, Eleanor's hidden sanctum of scientific inquiry, was meticulously restored and modernized, becoming a space for research, education, and the preparation of herbal remedies. The grand ballroom, once a symbol of the Vance family's opulent past, became a community center, hosting workshops, support groups, and cultural events. The overgrown gardens surrounding the manor were transformed into a thriving botanical sanctuary, cultivating the medicinal plants that Eleanor Vance had studied and used in her research. Emily, with her innate ability to connect with people and her unwavering belief in the power of community, became the heart and soul of Wildwood Manor's transformation. She organized volunteer workdays, bringing together residents of all ages to paint, clean, and garden. She hosted community meetings, sharing Eleanor Vance's story and inspiring others to join the Foundation's mission. Lily and Noah, who had initially been hesitant about living in the old house, embraced its transformation with enthusiasm. They helped Emily tend the gardens, their small hands carefully planting seeds and watering seedlings. They participated in community events, their laughter echoing through the halls of the manor, filling it with a joy and vitality that had been absent for decades. The transformation of Wildwood Manor was not just a physical restoration, it was a spiritual and emotional rebirth. The house, once burdened by the weight of the past, became a symbol of hope and healing, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of community. People from all walks of life found solace and support within its walls. Individuals struggling with chronic illnesses found relief in the natural therapies based on Eleanor Vance's research. Families affected by Wildwood syndrome found a community of understanding and support. Local artists and musicians found a space to share their talents. Wildwood Manor became a beacon of light in the town, drawing people together and fostering a sense of belonging. It was a place where the echoes of the past mingled with the vibrant energy of the present, where the legacy of Eleanor Vance lived on, inspiring generations to come. Emily, standing in the grand hall, surrounded by the laughter and chatter of the community, often reflected on the incredible journey she had undertaken. What had begun as a desperate act of survival had evolved into a profound purpose, a mission to honor Eleanor Vance's legacy and to bring healing and hope to others. The whispers in the walls of Wildwood Manor, once filled with mystery and fear, now carried a message of warmth and connection. They were a testament to the transformative power of community, the enduring spirit of human kindness, and the remarkable journey of a single mother who had dared to believe in the potential of an old, abandoned house. Amidst the chaos and danger of the Pharmacorp investigation and the arduous but rewarding transformation of Wildwood Manor, a quiet and profound connection deepened between Emily and Dan. Their shared experiences, the trials they faced together, and the unwavering support they offered each other forged a bond that transcended mere friendship. Dan had been more than just a handyman, he had been Emily's confidant, her protector, and her steadfast partner in the fight for justice. His pragmatic nature and his deep-rooted connection to Wildwood had grounded Emily, offering her a sense of stability and reassurance in the midst of uncertainty. He had seen her at her most vulnerable, her most determined, and her most compassionate, and he had admired her strength and resilience. Emily, in turn, had come to see Dan not just as a skilled craftsman but as a man of quiet integrity, with a deep well of kindness and a hidden capacity for tenderness. She had witnessed his unwavering support for her and her children, his dedication to restoring Wildwood Manor, and his genuine concern for the community. She had found solace in his presence, a sense of safety and understanding that she had not experienced in a long time. Their conversations, initially focused on the practicalities of the house and the investigation, gradually evolved into more personal exchanges. They shared stories about their pasts, their dreams for the future, and their hopes for Lily and Noah. They discovered shared values, a mutual respect for hard work, and a deep appreciation for the simple joys of life. As they worked side by side, their physical proximity fostered an unspoken intimacy. A shared glance, A casual touch, a comfortable silence, these small moments spoke volumes, hinting at a deeper connection that was slowly but surely emerging. The children, Lily and Noah, had also formed a strong bond with Dan. They saw him as a reliable and fun-loving figure in their lives, someone who could fix anything, tell captivating stories, and always find time for a game or a hug. His presence brought a sense of stability and joy to their lives, filling the void left by their father's absence. As Wildwood Manor began to take on its new identity as a community center, Emily and Dan found themselves working closely together, planning events, organizing volunteers, and shaping the future of the space. They discovered a natural synergy in their collaboration, a shared vision for creating a place of healing, support, and connection. The long hours they spent together, the shared laughter, and the sense of accomplishment they experienced in transforming the old house into a vibrant community hub fostered a sense of deep respect and affection. They began to rely on each other not just as partners in a project but as trusted friends and confidants. One evening, after a particularly successful community event, as they were cleaning up the grand hall, a moment of quiet intimacy settled between them. The room was bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun, the air filled with the lingering warmth of shared laughter and camaraderie. Dan stopped, his gaze meeting Emily's. He saw in her eyes a reflection of her strength, her compassion, and her unwavering determination. He felt a surge of emotion, a realization that his feelings for her had grown beyond mere friendship. Emily, in turn, saw in Dan's eyes a depth of kindness, a quiet strength, and a warmth that resonated with her own heart. She felt a pull towards him, a sense of recognition that they had found something special in each other. The silence stretched, filled with unspoken emotions. Then, Dan reached out and gently took Emily's hand. His touch was warm and reassuring, a silent invitation. Emily's heart fluttered. She looked at him, her eyes searching his, and saw not just a friend but a man she had come to deeply admire and respect. She felt a connection that went beyond the shared challenges and triumphs, a sense of belonging that she had yearned for. She returned his touch, her fingers intertwining with his. A tentative smile blossomed on her face, a reflection of the hope and happiness that was beginning to bloom within her. In that moment, amidst the echoes of the past and the promise of the future, a new chapter began in their lives. The trust and affection that had grown between them blossomed into a deeper connection, a love born from shared experiences and a mutual respect for each other's strength and resilience. Their relationship was not a whirlwind romance but a slow and steady unfolding, rooted in a solid foundation of friendship and shared purpose. They had faced adversity together, they had supported each other through difficult times, and they had built something beautiful and meaningful together. As they continued to work side by side, their love deepened, their bond strengthening with each passing day. They began to share their dreams for the future, envisioning a life together filled with love, laughter, and shared purpose. The whispers in the walls of Wildwood Manor, once echoes of the past, now carried a melody of hope and love, a testament to the transformative power of human connection and the enduring strength of the human heart. The transformation of Wildwood Manor extended beyond its walls, embracing the overgrown gardens that surrounded the house. These gardens, once a tangle of weeds and neglect, became a vibrant testament to Eleanor Vance's enduring legacy, a living memorial to her dedication to healing and her profound connection to the natural world. Emily, with the enthusiastic help of Lily and Noah, and guided by Eleanor Vance's detailed botanical sketches and notes, embarked on a journey to revive the gardens. They cleared away the weeds, pruned the overgrown shrubs, and carefully prepared the soil for planting. Dan, with his practical skills and his knowledge of local flora, assisted them in identifying the plants Eleanor Vance had studied, helping them to source seeds and seedlings from local nurseries and botanical gardens. He constructed raised beds, built trellises, and created pathways, transforming the chaotic wilderness into a structured and beautiful space. As they worked, Emily shared Eleanor Vance's story with Lily and Noah, teaching them about the medicinal properties of the plants they were planting and the importance of respecting the natural world. Lily, with her artistic flair, created colorful signs to label the different herbs and flowers, while Noah, ever the explorer, delighted in discovering hidden insects and butterflies among the foliage. The garden became a family project, a shared labor of love that brought Emily, Lily, and Noah closer together. They spent hours working side by side, their hands in the soil, their hearts filled with a sense of purpose and connection. As the plants began to flourish, the gardens transformed into a sensory symphony. The air filled with the sweet fragrance of lavender and chamomile, the pungent aroma of rosemary and thyme, and the delicate scent of wildflowers. The vibrant colors of the blossoms attracted bees, butterflies, and hummingbirds, creating a lively and buzzing ecosystem. Emily and Dan, inspired by Eleanor Vance's research, began to experiment with creating herbal remedies, using the plants they cultivated in the garden. They prepared infusions, tinctures, and salves, following Eleanor's meticulous instructions and adapting her formulas to modern needs. The garden became a living pharmacy, a source of healing and wellness for the community. Residents of Wildwood, drawn to the beauty and tranquility of the space, came to learn about the medicinal properties of the plants and to access the herbal remedies prepared by Emily and Dan. The garden also served as a place of remembrance, a space to honor Eleanor Vance and to celebrate her contributions to the community. A small memorial, featuring a stone plaque inscribed with her name and a quote from her journal, was erected in the center of the garden, surrounded by her favorite flowers. The annual Wildwood Herbal Festival was established to commemorate Eleanor Vance's legacy and to celebrate the healing power of nature. The festival drew visitors from across the region, featuring workshops on herbal medicine, demonstrations of traditional healing practices, and a vibrant marketplace showcasing local artisans and herbalists. The gardens of Wildwood Manor became a symbol of renewal and hope, a testament to the transformative power of nature and the enduring spirit of human kindness. They were a living link to the past, a connection to Eleanor Vance's wisdom and her unwavering dedication to healing. Emily, standing in the garden amidst the vibrant blossoms and the fragrant herbs, often reflected on the profound impact Eleanor Vance had had on her life. The old house, once a symbol of decay and mystery, had become a source of purpose and connection. And the gardens, once a tangle of neglect, had become a living tribute to a woman whose legacy continued to inspire and heal. The whispers in the walls of Wildwood Manor, now mingled with the rustling of leaves and the buzzing of bees, carried a message of gratitude and remembrance, a testament to the enduring power of healing and the beauty of the natural world. The journey that began with Emily's desperate gamble on a dilapidated old house culminated in a profound transformation, not only of Wildwood Manor but also of the lives it touched and the community it served. The echoes of the past, once whispers of mystery and fear, now resonated with a powerful message of hope, healing, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. The refined version of Eleanor Vance's Golden Blend formula, developed and rigorously tested by the Eleanor Vance Foundation, proved to be a medical breakthrough of extraordinary significance. Its efficacy in alleviating the debilitating symptoms of Wildwood syndrome was undeniable, offering a new lease on life to countless individuals who had long suffered in silence. The treatment was made accessible and affordable, a testament to the Foundation's unwavering commitment to Eleanor Vance's vision of healing for all. It was distributed through a network of nonprofit clinics and community health centers, ensuring that even those with limited resources could access the life-changing benefits of the formula. The impact of the treatment extended far beyond the immediate relief of symptoms. It empowered individuals to reclaim their lives, to return to work, to reconnect with their families, and to pursue their dreams with renewed energy and vitality. It transformed communities, bringing hope and prosperity to areas that had been ravaged by the debilitating effects of Wildwood syndrome. The Eleanor Vance Foundation became a national leader in the field of integrative medicine, pioneering innovative approaches to healthcare that combine the wisdom of traditional healing practices with the rigor of modern science. Wildwood Manor, its heart and soul, served as a model for community-based healthcare, a place where healing extended beyond the physical realm, encompassing emotional, social, and spiritual well-being. Emily, Dan, and Sarah, the unlikely heroes of this extraordinary journey, continued to play pivotal roles in the foundation's success. Emily, with her unwavering compassion and her ability to inspire others, served as its executive director, guiding its strategic direction and advocating for its mission on a national stage. Dan, with his practical skills and his deep connection to the land, oversaw the operations of the Wildwood Manor Community Center, ensuring its smooth functioning and creating a welcoming and inclusive environment for all. Sarah Jenkins, continuing her work at the Wildwood Gazette, became a tireless advocate for ethical healthcare and social justice, using her journalistic platform to champion the cause of the marginalized and to hold those in power accountable. Their personal lives flourished alongside their professional achievements. Emily and Dan's love deepened, their bond strengthened by shared purpose and mutual respect. They built a life together at Wildwood Manor, creating a loving and nurturing home for Lily and Noah, who blossomed in the vibrant and supportive community that surrounded them. Lily and Noah grew into compassionate and engaged young adults, inspired by their mother's courage and her commitment to making a difference in the world. They carried Eleanor Vance's legacy forward, pursuing careers in medicine and environmental science, driven by a desire to heal both people and the planet. The town of Wildwood underwent a remarkable transformation. Once a quiet and somewhat isolated community, it became a beacon of hope and innovation, attracting visitors and residents from across the country. The Eleanor Vance Foundation revitalized the local economy, creating jobs and opportunities. Wildwood Manor became a source of pride for the town, a symbol of its resilience and its commitment to a brighter future. The memory of Eleanor Vance, the dedicated researcher who had dared to challenge the darkness, lived on in the hearts of the community and beyond. Her story became an inspiration, a testament to the power of one individual to make a profound difference in the world. And so, the whispers in the walls of Wildwood Manor, once echoes of mystery and fear, transformed into a symphony of hope and healing. They spoke of resilience, compassion, and the enduring power of the human spirit to overcome adversity. Emily, standing on the porch of Wildwood Manor, her gaze sweeping across the vibrant gardens and the bustling community center, felt a profound sense of peace and fulfillment. The journey had been arduous, fraught with danger and loss, but it had ultimately led to a place of profound beauty and purpose. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the sweet scent of herbs and the laughter of children. It whispered tales of the past, of Eleanor Vance's dedication and Sarah's sacrifice, but it also spoke of the future, of the healing and hope that had blossomed within the walls of Wildwood Manor. Dan joined her on the porch, his arm around her waist, his eyes filled with love and pride. Lily and Noah, now young adults, stood beside them, their faces reflecting the same sense of purpose and compassion that had driven their mother. The family stood together, united in their love and their shared commitment to Eleanor Vance's legacy. They looked out at the vibrant community they had helped to create, a testament to the power of truth, justice, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. And as the sun set, casting a golden glow over Wildwood Manor, Emily knew that the whispers in the walls would continue to tell their story, a story of darkness overcome by light, of loss transformed into healing, and of a future filled with hope and the promise of a better world.